I'm checking the core case details first, so the retelling stays calm without drifting away from the real file. In the Risch case, the quiet kitchen on Old Bedford Road is where you and I begin, with pale afternoon light, a telephone hanging wrong, and a child's simple words still resting in the file. There is no hurry here, and the old pages will wait while your breathing slows. We come to Lincoln, Massachusetts, on the 24th of October, 1961, when the trees were already thinning and the air had that cool, dry feel of late autumn. You can imagine the house set back from the road, ordinary and cared for, with children's things in the rooms and the small signs of a young family's day still scattered about. Joan Risch had been home that afternoon, or close enough to home that neighbors would later place her there, moving through a day that had begun with errands, a dental appointment, and the familiar work of keeping two small children fed, dressed, and watched. The Risch case did not begin with a chase, or a confession, or a clue wrapped neatly for detectives. Hat seemed to be saying several things at once, none of them clearly enough. You stand there in the doorway now, in the mind's careful reconstruction, and you notice how domestic everything is before you notice anything else. The sink, the table, the telephone on the wall, the wastebasket shifted out of place, the kind of room where coffee cools, and mail waits, and children ask small questions. That ordinariness is part of why the case stayed with people. Joan Carolyn Risch was 31 years old then, married to Martin Risch, mother to Lillian and David, and newly settled in Lincoln after a move earlier that year. She had worked in publishing in New York, and people remembered her as bright, capable, and composed. You can picture a woman who knew books and deadlines, who had once moved through offices filled with paper and carbon copies, and who now moved through a different rhythm of errands, neighbors, children, and quiet suburban roads. Nothing about that morning, at first glance, asked anyone to lean closer. Martin had left early for a business trip to New York. Joan took the children through the morning routine, and at some point she drove with her daughter to a dental appointment in Bedford. The file holds these things plainly, almost gently. A dentist's office, a child beside her mother, a little shopping afterward, cash paid across a counter, the return toward Old Bedford Road. When you read that part, nothing seems out of place, and perhaps that is why the later uncertainty feels so heavy, without ever needing to be loud. Back at home, her young son David had been left with a neighbor, Barbara Barker, while Joan handled the appointment. Lillian later played nearby with the Barker children. The day moved along in ordinary fragments. Mail came. Milk was delivered. The house stood in its usual place, with the driveway leading in from the road and the woods and other homes close enough to make it feel watched over, but not watched closely. You begin to understand how a case can grow cold inside a small gap between one ordinary sighting and the next. At around a little after 2 in the afternoon, Barbara Barker believed she saw Joan near her own driveway, moving quickly, carrying something red in her arms. At the time, it did not become a memory with sharp edges. It was just a neighbor, seen in passing, perhaps hurrying after a child, perhaps busy with some household thing. You and I know how often cases depend on moments like that, when no one yet understands that a simple glance may become the last confirmed sighting. It is a soft fact, and it stays soft. Later, when Lillian returned home, she found no mother waiting in the kitchen. Her words, remembered afterward, were childlike and plain, and because they were plain, they became part of the case's long sorrow. She said her mother was gone, and that the kitchen was covered with red paint. You can hear the innocence in that description, not as drama, but as a child trying to name what she saw with the few safe words she had. In the Risch case, even the first alarm came gently, through misunderstanding. Barbara Barker went to the house and saw enough to call the police. Sergeant Mike McHugh of the Lincoln Police arrived soon after, stepping into a home that did not give him a single clean answer. The kitchen had blood on the walls and floor. A table was overturned. The wall telephone had been pulled loose, and the receiver was found in the wastebasket. The wastebasket itself had been moved from under the sink into the middle of the floor, as if the room had been rearranged by confusion rather than intention. You can almost feel the stillness after that first entry, the kind that settles when a house has stopped making sense. The police searched for Joan inside the home, because the first thought was simple and practical. If there was blood, perhaps she was nearby. If the kitchen showed signs of distress, perhaps she had collapsed somewhere close. But room after room gave nothing back. The children were there. David was found safe, though upset, in his crib. Joan was not in the house, not in the yard, and not waiting just beyond the first hurried search. This is one reason the Risch case went cold. It began with evidence that looked urgent, but it did not point in one direction. Blood can seem like an answer from far away, but in a patient investigation, it often becomes a question. Where did it begin? Who moved through it? Why were there no clear footprints? Why did the trail lead out, but not far enough? You sit with those questions at the small lamplit desk, and the paper feels heavier than it should. The blood in the kitchen was later understood to be type O, the same type Joan was known to have, but type O was common. That made it useful, but not decisive. Investigators also believed the total amount was not necessarily enough to prove a fatal injury. It may have looked more severe than it was. That is the strange quiet of this file. The kitchen seemed alarming to everyone who saw it, yet the science available at the time could not turn the stains into a clear story. You notice the limits of 1961 on every page. There was no modern DNA testing waiting in the lab, no quick database search, no home security footage, no phone location record, no traffic camera resting silently at an intersection. Investigators had interviews, blood typing, photographs, footprints if they could find them, fingerprints if they could compare them, and the patient work of asking who had seen what. The air around the case feels colder when you remember that. So much depended on memory, and memory can be kind, but it can also blur. The telephone becomes one of the first quiet objects you return to. It had been pulled from the wall, or pulled loose enough to matter, and the receiver was in the wastebasket. A telephone in a kitchen is a simple thing, but in this room it becomes hard to read. Did Joan try to call for help? Did someone stop her? Was it knocked down during confusion, or was it arranged afterward to suggest one version of events? You hold each thought lightly, because the file never lets one thought settle for long. The telephone directory was reportedly open to the page where emergency numbers could be written, though none were written there. That detail is small enough to miss, and yet it has stayed in retellings because it feels almost intimate. You can picture a hand opening a directory, pages thin and slightly glossy, the smell of ink and kitchen dust rising as the book lies open. But a detail can feel intimate without being conclusive. Patient detective work means letting even a vivid detail remain uncertain when the evidence will not carry it further. There were also marks and drops outside the kitchen, including traces upstairs, and a trail leading toward the driveway. That trail led to Joan's car, where stains were found in more than one place. The car was still there. Joan was not, so the driveway becomes another quiet boundary in the Risch case, a place where the known world thins out. You can stand there in thought, near the car's fender and trunk, hearing the dry leaves move along the ground, and still not know whether Joan left alone, was helped, or was taken. No firm bloody footprints were found, which puzzled investigators then, and still puzzles anyone who reads the case slowly. A kitchen with blood on surfaces might be expected to hold prints, smears from shoes, some small pattern left by ordinary movement. Yet the file did not give them that. You can imagine a detective looking down at the floor, careful not to disturb anything, feeling the coolness of the room and the odd absence underfoot. Sometimes, what is missing in a case has as much weight as what is present. Outside, the trail did not become a road map. It did not lead to a body, or a witness who could say with certainty what happened, or an object dropped in panic that named another person. It simply moved the question from the kitchen to the driveway. You and I can sit with that for a while, because it is the shape of many cold cases. The evidence takes you somewhere, but only a few steps. Then it stops, and the years begin to gather around that stopping place. There were reported sightings later that day of a woman who may have been Joan, walking along nearby roads, possibly appearing unsteady or disoriented. These sightings have always mattered, but they have never settled the Risch case. A person glimpsed from a car window is hard to hold in certainty. Clothing can be remembered incorrectly. Distance changes faces. A familiar posture can be imagined after a name appears in the newspaper. You can hear the careful tone in a detective's question, asking a witness to return to the road in memory without adding anything new. One sighting placed a woman walking near Route 128, where construction was underway in that broader period. Another suggested someone moving along the road in a way that drew attention. But none of these reports became the clear last page everyone wanted. They remained possible. That word, possible, appears like a pale stamp across the whole file. Possible sighting, possible injury, possible abduction, possible voluntary disappearance. Each one opens a door, and each door leads into a room with no lamp. The construction theory would come later as one of the sadder possibilities. If Joan had left the house injured or confused, perhaps she wandered toward an area where earth was open, where machines had cut into the landscape, where a fall or burial by later work might have hidden what happened. You can imagine the smell of raw soil, diesel, damp leaves and cold metal. Yet a theory, even a compassionate one, is not the same as proof. The land changed, the roadwork moved on, and the file kept its silence. At the house, investigators also had to think about Joan's personal belongings. Her purse was left behind. Some clothing was present, while another coat may have been missing. These details pulled gently in different directions. A person planning to leave might take money, identification, and practical items. A person leaving in distress might take almost nothing. A person moved by someone else might leave everything behind because there was no choice in the matter. You turn those possibilities over slowly, the way detectives did, and none of them become simple. Martin Risch returned from New York after being notified. His day had begun far away from the kitchen, with business travel and the ordinary separations of work. The investigation looked at the timeline, as it had to, and his absence became part of the documented day. There is no need to treat that with anything but steadiness. In a missing person case, everyone close to the missing person becomes part of the timeline. Not because suspicion is a story's purpose, but because time must be accounted for, hour by hour. The children were too young to give the kind of account adults wanted. Lillian could say what she saw and what she understood, and David could not offer much at all. That leaves a tender blank space in the file. You can imagine investigators lowering their voices around them, aware that the house was not just a scene to be studied, but a home that had changed in one afternoon. The Risch case went cold partly because the people closest to the room were either absent, too young, or gone. Neighbors gave what they could. Barbara Barker's movements became important. The school bus, the driveway, the possible unfamiliar car, the times people returned or passed along Old Bedford Road, all were gathered and compared. A neighbor's memory is a delicate instrument. It holds sounds, colors, errands, interruptions, and assumptions. You know this from your own life, perhaps. A car seen for a moment becomes meaningful only after the day has broken open, and by then the mind has already begun arranging what it saw. One young witness recalled an unfamiliar car, perhaps dirty, perhaps two-toned, possibly with blue. Another account suggested a car backing from a driveway around the relevant time, but those impressions never became a license plate, a driver's name, or a confirmed vehicle. You can feel the investigators leaning toward the road, listening for the sound of tires on gravel, trying to place a car exactly where memory left it vaguely. The road gave them motion, but not identity. It gave them a shape, then took it back. Inside the kitchen, the overturned table invited speculation, though it could not explain itself. Furniture can be moved by struggle, by accident, by cleanup, by a person dizzy and reaching for balance, or by someone trying to make a room look one way rather than another. The room did not speak in a single grammar. You and I return to that, because it matters. If a scene has one clear meaning, an investigation can follow it. If it has several possible meanings, each step must be slower. The wastebasket, too, sat in the middle of things like a small object with too much responsibility. The phone receiver was in it. Other items were found there as well, and explanations came for some but not all. In an ordinary kitchen, a wastebasket is barely noticed. In the Risch kitchen, it became a container of questions. You can picture a detective lifting items carefully, the slight scrape of paper against metal, the smell of household refuse mixed with dust, all of it made strange by context. There were children's clothes with blood on them, including items belonging to David. That fact sounds alarming at first, but even here the interpretation was not clear. They may have been used to wipe blood. They may have been in the wrong place at the wrong moment. They may have marked an attempt by someone injured to steady or clean themselves. The important thing is not to hurry past uncertainty. The patient reader of this file keeps saying, maybe, and lets that word do its quiet work. In modern retellings, the blood often becomes the center of the Risch case, because it is vivid and hard to ignore. But for investigators, vivid did not mean clear. The stains had patterns, but the patterns did not become a full sequence. The amount mattered, but the amount did not close the question. The type mattered, but the type could not identify only Joan. You can almost hear the pencil moving across a report, each observation careful, each conclusion held back. That restraint is part of the old detective work we are sitting with tonight. It is easy, years later, to want the kitchen to answer us. It is harder to accept that the best investigators may have stood in that room, seen all that could be seen, and still had to leave with several theories alive. The room's quietness after the police left must have been profound. A home can hold silence differently after people have searched it. Every chair and counter seems to remember being looked at. The first searches spread outward from the house. Police checked the property, nearby roads, wooded areas and hospitals. They asked whether a woman matching Joan's description had been admitted somewhere, injured, confused, or unable to give her name. Nothing came back with the certainty they needed. You can imagine the calls placed from desks under fluorescent lights, the ring of hospital switchboards, the polite repetition of height, clothing, age, and name. Each call was practical. Each call ended with the same absence. Search dogs were reportedly brought into the effort, but they did not solve it either. A dog can follow scent only where conditions allow, and a scent trail can be broken by cars, weather, surfaces, and time. The autumn air may have held damp leaves, exhaust, and the cold mineral smell of road dust. A handler might stand quietly at the edge of a driveway, waiting for the animal to choose a direction. But again, the trail did not become an answer. The Risch case kept narrowing, then opening again. By evening, the household had become a place of official movement. Officers came and went. Neighbors watched. Martin returned. The children had to be cared for. Reports had to be written while impressions were fresh. You can sit beside the desk sergeant in your mind, hearing the low murmur of voices and the scratch of notes being made before memory softened. Cold cases often begin as warm confusion. The first day is full of motion, and yet the future coldness is already forming in the spaces no one can fill. What made the quiet kitchen so difficult was that it appeared to contain both presence and disappearance at once. Joan seemed to have been there. Something had happened there, or something had been made to look as if it had happened there. Yet she was not there, and no one could say where she went after the driveway. That is a particular kind of investigative ache. You are not beginning from nothing, you are beginning from too many partial things, none of them willing to stand alone. The newspaper attention came, as it often did in those years, with photographs, timelines, and public appeals. A missing woman, a blood-marked kitchen, a suburban road, and children left behind made a story that people could not easily forget. But attention is not the same as clarity. Tips can flood in and still leave the file thirsty. You can picture envelopes arriving, phones ringing, strangers offering sightings, guesses, and memories, while detectives tried to separate useful detail from anxious imagination. Rewards were offered later, and the case remained public enough that people kept returning to it.
But the early days are where the path usually either sharpens or fades. In the Risch case, it faded while still seeming close. That is the part that makes it so haunting in the gentlest sense of the word. The answer felt as if it should be nearby, perhaps in the kitchen, perhaps in the car, perhaps in one neighbor's brief glance. Yet nearness did not become knowledge. Joan's own history added another layer, and we approach it carefully. She had been orphaned young after a family tragedy, and later she built a life through education, work, marriage, and motherhood. She had attended Wilson College, worked in publishing, and was remembered as intelligent and capable. These facts do not solve anything, but they keep her from becoming only the missing person at the center of a puzzle. You and I should let the file hold her whole life, not only the afternoon she disappeared. That is part of patient detective work too. A person is not only the last place they were seen. Joan was a reader, a mother, a neighbor, a wife, and someone with private thoughts no file can fully preserve. The kitchen can become so central that it nearly swallows the person who once moved through it. So we return, gently, to the human shape of the Risch case. The house was not a riddle box. It was a home, and someone was missing from it. Later, one of the most discussed discoveries involved library books Joan had borrowed in the months before she vanished. Some reportedly dealt with disappearances, murders, or missing persons, and one or more seemed to contain elements that reminded people of her own case. This detail has carried a great deal of weight in public speculation. You can imagine the library cards, the stamped dates, the soft thump of books being stacked at a desk. But reading about disappearance is not the same as planning one. Still, investigators and later writers had to consider it. Joan had worked in publishing and was comfortable with books. She may have had broad reading interests. She may have been drawn to mysteries, as many careful readers are, or she may have been studying something privately, for reasons no one could confirm. The library record opened a door into possibility, but possibility is not proof. You can sit in the warm hush of a library aisle and feel how easily curiosity can be mistaken for intention. Some have wondered whether Joan staged her own disappearance. The left-behind purse, the strange kitchen, the library books, and the lack of a body have all been used to keep that theory alive. But the theory has always carried difficulties. She left 2 small children behind. She had little money with her, if any. No confirmed later life was ever found. No letter arrived to explain her choice. When you examine that path slowly, it becomes less a road than a line drawn through fog. Others have wondered whether she was interrupted by someone, perhaps a stranger or someone she knew, and taken away. The kitchen, telephone, possible car, and blood trail can be arranged to support that thought. But here again,
The file withholds the final piece. There was no identified intruder, no arrest followed, no confession, no recovered object, no definitive witness placed another person in the kitchen at the right moment. You can see why detectives would pursue it, and why it still did not resolve. Another theory suggests injury, confusion, and wandering. This one rests partly on the possible sightings, and partly on the idea that the blood may have come from a non-fatal wound. In that version, Joan leaves the house hurt or disoriented, moves along the road, and disappears somewhere the searchers did not reach. It is a quiet theory, and a sad one. Yet it also asks us to believe that no later search, no construction work, no chance discovery ever returned her. The land kept its answer, if that answer is there, because the Risch case has no settled ending. Every theory has had to live beside the others. That is tiring for detectives, families, and readers alike. A solved case lets the mind put its weight down. An unsolved case keeps asking to be lifted again. You can imagine an old folder being taken from a shelf, the cardboard dry against the hand, the corners softened by years. Someone opens it hoping that a detail will look different under new light. Most days, it does not. The kitchen photographs, where they exist in the record and in descriptions, are not something we need to dwell on harshly. For our purposes, they are evidence of confusion, not spectacle. We can think instead of the surfaces: a wall that held marks, a floor that held smears, a telephone that no longer sat properly in its place, a wastebasket where it should not have been. The room becomes quieter when seen this way, as a set of objects that lost their ordinary meanings for one afternoon. You may notice how often the case depends on placement: the phone in the wastebasket, the wastebasket in the floor space, the car in the driveway, the mail at the mailbox, the children in neighboring care and upstairs rooms, Joan absent from every place she should have been. Detective work is often the study of where things are and where they are not. In the Risch case, the map is small, almost intimate, and yet its missing center is vast. Time matters just as much as place. The morning appointment, the shopping, the return home, the neighbor's sighting around mid-afternoon, the school bus, the child's discovery, the police call. Each time is a peg in the wall, and investigators tried to hang the day upon them. But the cloth would not lie flat. There were wrinkles between the times. You and I can smooth them with our hands as much as we like, but the old fabric still gathers in the same places. This is why the case went cold in a quiet kitchen, not because no one looked. It went cold because the first evidence was ambiguous. The later sightings were uncertain, the physical science was limited, and the missing woman herself left no confirmed path beyond the driveway. It went cold because a home can contain signs of something wrong without revealing the shape of that wrongness. It went cold because every answer needed one more fact than the file could provide. And so, as we turn the next page, we stay with the same house a little longer, because before the theories widened outward, the kitchen itself still had more quiet work to ask of anyone patient enough to look. The kitchen still asks for patience, because the first look at any room is never the whole look, and in the Risch case, the smallest household things kept returning to the center of the file. You can stand with the investigators in that narrow domestic space and let your eyes adjust, not to darkness, but to meaning. A chair is not only a chair when it has been moved. A telephone is not only a telephone when it has been pulled from its place. Even the quiet under the sink begins to feel important. The walls and floor gave detectives visible evidence, yet the pattern did not unfold like a set of instructions. Blood had marked the room, but not in a way that settled whether Joan was attacked, injured by accident, or trying to clean or move through the space in distress. You can imagine an officer bending slightly, careful with his shoes, his notebook held at an angle, while the kitchen smelled faintly of soap, old linoleum, And the metallic trace no one wanted to name too sharply. The Risch case became, in those first hours, a lesson in how evidence can be both present and withholding. There was no sign that large valuables had been taken, and that mattered in the first sorting of ideas. A burglary gone wrong would be one possible road, but that road needed more support than the house seemed willing to give. The home did not look like a place someone had searched for money or jewelry. It looked focused, or accidental, or staged, depending on which detail you chose to begin with. We have to be careful there, because beginning with the wrong detail can make all the other details bend toward it. You turn the page and come again to the telephone, because it is hard to leave it alone. In a 1961 kitchen, a wall phone was a lifeline in the plainest sense. It was how a mother called a doctor, a neighbor, the police, a husband, away on business. If Joan reached for it, then the receiver in the wastebasket might carry a desperate meaning. If someone else handled it, the meaning changes. If it fell or was placed there later, it changes again. The file lets you hold all three possibilities, but it refuses to choose for you. The telephone cord, the wall mount, and the odd final resting place of the receiver invited questions that could not be answered by blood typing alone. Fingerprints might have been sought, of course, but a household phone in a family kitchen would already carry ordinary prints from ordinary days. Joan's hands, Martin's hands, perhaps a neighbor's hand during some earlier visit, all could have touched surfaces without meaning anything on the 24th of October. That is one of the quiet frustrations of old domestic cases. Homes are full of innocent traces before anything unusual ever happens. The wastebasket's position also troubled the reading of the room. If it had been under the sink earlier, then why was it found nearer the middle of the floor? Had someone dragged it out to catch something? Had it been knocked or pulled during confusion? Had a child moved it earlier without anyone remembering? You can almost hear the soft hollow sound of a metal basket shifting across the floor, an ordinary sound made strange only afterward. In the Risch case, the room's ordinary objects became witnesses with no language. There were reports that paper towels or similar household materials had been used, or could have been used, in relation to the stains. Such a detail raises the idea of wiping, cleaning, pressure, or panic. But it also remains unclear, because kitchens are made for wiping. A towel near a sink does not become sinister by itself. You sit with that practical truth, because it prevents the mind from running too far ahead. The best detective work often begins by refusing to make ordinary things extraordinary, unless the evidence insists. The table, overturned or disturbed, seemed to suggest disorder, but even disorder has varieties. A table can fall in a struggle, but it can also tip when someone stumbles, when a chair catches its leg, when a person reaches hard for balance, or when someone arranges a scene too quickly. We place each idea beside the others, not stacking them into certainty. The cool room, the pale counters, the children's items nearby, the smell of lunch or dishwater fading into police presence. All of it stays human before it becomes theoretical. One of the softer pains in the Risch case is that the kitchen was not sealed away from family life before it became evidence. Children had passed through the home. A neighbor entered out of concern. Officers arrived after the scene had already been discovered by people acting naturally, urgently, and kindly. In modern terms, we might wish for a perfect, untouched scene, but life rarely pauses that neatly. You can feel the difficulty of it. The first people there were trying to help, not preserve a puzzle for later study. Because Joan was missing, the work could not remain inside the house for long. Every minute had to be spent both understanding the room and searching beyond it. That split attention matters. If a person is injured somewhere nearby, detectives cannot linger indefinitely over a wastebasket while daylight drains from the road. If a person has been taken away, then interviews and alerts become urgent in their own quiet way. The file had to grow in several directions at once, and each direction took time from the others. You can imagine the afternoon. changing color outside the windows. The light would have thinned across the yard, the trees holding their late October branches in a still, grey way. Officers moved from kitchen to driveway, from driveway to road, from road to neighboring homes. Their shoes picked up grit. Their breath showed faintly if the air had cooled enough. Behind them, the kitchen waited, no longer just a family room, but the center of a widening search. The driveway offered another small chain of questions. Joan's car was present, which meant she had not simply driven away in the easiest manner. Stains on or near the car complicated the idea further. If she had gone to the car, why had she not left in it? If someone else used another vehicle, why was there no clear witness to that movement? If she moved only on foot, how far could she have gone? You and I stand there beside the parked car in the fading light, and we notice again how close the answer seems, and how absent it remains. That sense of closeness may be part of why people still return to the Risch case. Some cases feel lost from the beginning, like a figure vanishing into a city crowd or a landscape too large to search. This one feels contained, a mother in a house, a kitchen, a driveway, a short span of afternoon, a child finding something wrong, a neighbor calling for help. Yet the containment is deceptive, because once Joan leaves the confirmed record, the small map opens into every road, every passing car, every patch of woods, every memory that might or might not be hers. The mail and milk deliveries, ordinary as they were, helped set the day's texture. In a suburban neighborhood, those small services create a rhythm almost no one thinks about until the rhythm matters. A truck stops, a person walks to a door, bottles clink, envelopes slide into a box. You can almost hear those sounds under the later questions. Detectives had to ask who came by, who saw the house, who noticed a car, who could place Joan alive at one point and absent at another. Routine became a measuring tool. Yet routine is imperfect. A delivery person may not look toward a kitchen window. A neighbor may not remember a car if the car seemed ordinary then. A child may not understand the order of events the way an adult needs them ordered. Time in a neighborhood is soft until police harden it with questions. We can feel that hardening in the reports as ordinary minutes are pulled into a timeline and asked to become exact. Some do, others fray. The Barker household became important because it sat close to Joan's final known afternoon. Barbara Barker had cared for David earlier, and Lillian had been around the neighboring children. Later, Lillian returned and found the troubling kitchen. Barbara's memory of seeing Joan, or a woman believed to be Joan, near the driveway became one of the strongest anchors. Still, memory is not a photograph. You can respect Barbara's account while also feeling the limits placed upon it by distance, timing, and the fact that she had no reason, in the moment, to study every detail. That is a tender thing to remember about witnesses. They are often asked later to carry more weight than any casual glance was meant to bear. A neighbor seen through a window, a garment color, a posture, a bundle in someone's arms, all may become central after the fact. But when it happens, it is just a day. You may know this from your own quiet memories, where something once passed unnoticed and only later seemed to glow. The Risch case rests on several such moments, and none of them can be pressed too hard without changing shape. The reported red bundle, or something red carried in Joan's arms, drew attention because the kitchen later contained blood. But color in memory is especially vulnerable. Red could be clothing, towels, a child's item, a coat, or something else entirely. It might have been no bundle at all, only an impression formed by movement. You sit with that uncertainty because it keeps the tone honest. The case does not need dramatic invention. It has enough sadness and patience in the plain facts. If Joan had been carrying something, why would she have been outside? If she was injured, why not go to a neighbor? If she was following a child, why were the children accounted for? If she was being forced, why was there not more noise or a clearer witness? These questions circle quietly, and they circled for investigators too. The road, the driveway, and the neighbors were close enough that one expects sound or sight to matter. Yet suburban quiet can be deceptive. A person can miss a great deal while folding laundry, making lunch, or settling a child. There may have been sounds that afternoon, but not necessarily sounds anyone understood. A car door closing, a telephone dropping, a table falling, a child calling, a woman moving quickly, all could be folded into ordinary neighborhood noise, if no one yet knew to listen. You can hear the muted quality of that time. Houses with windows closed against autumn, radios playing softly, leaves gathered along the roadside, a passing engine covering a smaller sound. The Risch case lives in that muted layer, where a single unnoticed moment might have mattered greatly. Investigators also considered whether Joan might have had an accident in the kitchen, a fall, a cut, some sudden medical trouble, or a disoriented state could explain parts of the scene. It might explain blood without another person. It might explain a failed attempt to use the phone. It might explain movement toward the car. But it does not easily explain the full disappearance, unless she then wandered out and was never found. We are back at the same quiet threshold where one theory carries us to the driveway and then leaves us there. The old reports had to weigh medical possibilities without the benefit of later forensic insight. They could ask doctors about blood loss. They could examine the home for signs of a fall. They could compare known blood type. But they could not sequence DNA, run advanced trace tests, or map the scene with modern reconstruction tools. You can imagine a laboratory bench from that era, glass tubes, paper labels, careful hands, and a report that offered only a limited kind of answer. The science was doing what it could, but what it could do was not enough. In cold cases, that gap between effort and capacity is often misunderstood. It is not that earlier investigators were careless because they lacked modern tools. Many were diligent within the tools they had. They asked neighbors. They searched woods. They checked hospitals. They preserved what they could. But the world had not yet invented the shortcuts later generations would expect. The Risch case was born in a time when patience was not a virtue added to investigation. It was the investigation. The first night likely brought a different kind of searching. Daylight had gone. Flashlights moved across yards and road edges. Officers would have watched for disturbed leaves, clothing, a footprint, a sign that someone had passed through brush. The cold would have settled into hands and collars. You can feel the dampness of autumn ground through a shoe, the beam of a flashlight sliding over stones and roots. Each small shine might draw the eye, and each shine might turn out to be only water on a leaf. Searches in wooded or semi-rural areas are both active and strangely quiet. People call out. Dogs move. Branches crack. Yet the larger feeling is one of listening because everyone is waiting for the landscape to answer. In the Risch case, the landscape did not answer. No one found Joan at the edge of the property. No one found her just beyond the first line of trees. The road did not produce the object or mark that would point clearly onward. The search widened, and widening can feel like losing focus, even when it is necessary. There is a human patience in that widening. Someone has to knock on one more door. Someone has to ask one more driver. Someone has to stand at the station and write down every call from every person who thinks they may have seen her. The work is repetitive, but not empty. You can imagine a detective's desk under a small lamp, a cup of coffee cooling beside a stack of notes, the telephone ringing every few minutes with another maybe. Maybe is not useless. It is just heavy. Some tips likely came from people who had truly seen something. Others came from people who wanted to help and were mistaken. That is not a failing. It is what happens when a community is worried and a name appears in the paper. A woman walking along a road becomes possibly Joan. A stranger in a store becomes possibly Joan. A memory from the wrong day shifts itself toward the right one. Detectives have to accept the help while gently sorting it. And that sorting takes a great deal of time. The possible sightings after Joan left the house remained among the most important and most difficult pieces. One witness described a woman walking in a bent or unsteady way near the road. Another account placed a woman along a route that could connect, in theory, to larger roads or construction areas. But the descriptions did not give the kind of certainty that closes a file. You can picture an investigator returning to the spot with a witness, asking where the woman stood, which way she faced, how fast the car was moving, and how the light fell through the windshield. Those details matter because seeing from a moving car is an imperfect act. The glass reflects the sky. The road pulls the eye forward. A driver glances for only a second, then the scene is gone. Later, the mind tries to hold the figure still, to recover clothing, hair, posture, expression. It is an honorable effort, but it is not always reliable. The Risch case did not fail because people refused to remember. It went cold partly because remembering was being asked to do work it could not fully do. If the woman seen was Joan, then the case changes shape. It suggests she left the house alive, perhaps hurt or confused, and moved some distance on foot. It might mean she was not immediately taken from the kitchen by another person. It might mean that the final event happened somewhere beyond the known scene. But if the woman was not Joan, then those sightings may have led investigators toward a foggy side path. You and I hold both thoughts, because the file never releases one in favor of the other. The possibility of voluntary disappearance also has to be handled with care. People sometimes vanish by choice, even when families cannot imagine it, and investigators must consider that path. But in Joan's case, the circumstances make it difficult. There were children left behind in a sudden and unsettling way. There was blood in the kitchen. There was no confirmed preparation, no later confirmed contact, no financial trail that clearly supported a planned new life. So while the theory exists, it rests uneasily beside the domestic evidence. The library books are often used to strengthen that theory, and they deserve slow attention rather than quick dismissal. Joan reportedly had read books involving disappearances, including stories where women vanished or bodies were not immediately found. It is easy to place those books beside her own disappearance and feel a chill of connection. But readers know how many paths a library shelf can offer. A person may read mysteries because they are curious, because they once worked with books, because a title was nearby, because an afternoon needed filling. Reading is not confession. You can imagine Joan in a library before all this, standing in the hush between shelves, perhaps drawing a book down with her fingers against the spine. The air would smell of paper, varnished wood, and dust warmed by a radiator. A date stamp would press onto a card. The book would come home in a stack, folded into ordinary life. Afterward, that ordinary stack would be asked to explain the unexplainable. It is a great deal to ask of borrowed pages. At the same time, detectives could not ignore the coincidence. If a missing woman had recently read about disappearances, they had to ask whether she was thinking about leaving, staging, hiding, or studying. That is the careful middle ground. We do not pretend the detail is meaningless, and we do not pretend it proves intention. You sit with the library card as you sit with the telephone receiver. It is an object touched by Joan, carrying a small part of her private mind, but not enough of it to answer for her. The Risch case is full of these half-lit objects. A phone, a wastebasket, a car, a book, a possible red garment, a witness's glimpse. None of them is empty. None of them is complete. In a solved case, one object often becomes the key that turns the lock. Here, the objects sit together like keys from different doors, all worn, all plausible, none fitting cleanly. You can feel the detective's patience in trying each one without forcing it. There is also the question of geography. Lincoln was not an anonymous city block. It was a quieter town, with roads, woods, and homes set apart enough that movement could go unseen for stretches. Old Bedford Road, nearby routes, and the developing road network offered both containment and escape. A person could be seen by a neighbor and then not seen again for some time. A car could pass unnoticed if no one knew to look. The very calmness of the area made unusual movement less expected. The road construction theory draws from this geography. Work on Route 128 and nearby areas created disturbed land, trenches, fill, and machinery. If Joan wandered into such an area, or if her body somehow came to rest where later work covered it, discovery might have become difficult. It is a sad, practical idea, not a dramatic one. You can smell the turned soil and diesel, hear the distant clank of machinery, and picture men focused on grading, hauling, and building, unaware that history might be underfoot. But this theory, too, lacks the decisive proof that patient investigators needed. No remains were found in a way that confirmed it. No worker came forward with a definite memory. No piece of clothing emerged from fill or roadside brush to make the file suddenly change color. Over the years, construction areas shifted from active sites to finished roadways, and the chance of answering that particular question grew thinner. Time can seal a landscape as surely as earth can. The idea of a stranger's involvement rests on a different kind of geography. Roads bring people through. A quiet house can be approached. A woman alone with young children may answer a door. A delivery, a repair, a lost driver, a salesman, any ordinary pretext might create contact. Investigators had to consider those possibilities, but a stranger leaves behind a harder trail when no one sees him clearly. Without a name, a plate, a fingerprint, or a repeated pattern tied to the area, the theory spreads too widely to grip. You can feel how frustrating that would be in the station. Too many men could have passed along a road in 1961. Too many vehicles could match a vague description. Too many ordinary knocks could be imagined without being proved. A detective might pin a map to a wall, mark roads, mark houses, mark sightings, and still find the center missing. The Risch case does not lack possibilities. It lacks the one fixed point beyond Joan herself. The possibility of someone known to Joan introduces another quiet difficulty. If someone she recognized came to the door, there might be little noise at first. The kitchen might become the setting only after a conversation, an accident, an argument, or something else no one heard. Yet no confirmed known visitor emerged as the clear answer. Friends and acquaintances had to be interviewed, schedules checked, movements compared. You can imagine the social discomfort of that work, asking polite questions in living rooms that smelled of coffee, wool coats, and cigarette smoke. Cold cases often leave behind an emotional map, as well as a factual one. Families, neighbors, and investigators remember where they stood when they heard the news. They remember the tone of a call, the look of a kitchen, the face of a child trying to explain. Those memories do not solve the case, but they keep it alive. In the Risch case, the community's memory became part of the long file, a soft layer under the formal reports. Years later, people would revisit the case through articles, books, and discussions, each time hoping that distance might reveal what immediacy missed. That is a common hope. When you step back from a painting, sometimes the image appears, but with some cases, distance only makes the missing parts larger. The kitchen remains the kitchen, the sightings remain possible, the library books remain suggestive but unresolved, the road remains open in every direction. Still, returning to an old case is not useless. A new reader may notice an assumption. A cold case detective may recheck a timeline. A family member may remember a name connected to a small event. Technology may change what can be learned from old evidence, if the evidence still exists in a usable form. You and I, sitting quietly with the Risch case, are part of that patient tradition in a modest way. We are not solving it by force. we are letting it be seen carefully. One thing the file teaches is the danger of a story that is too neat. If we decide too early that Joan staged everything, then the blood and children must be made to fit that decision. If we decide too early that a stranger came, then every odd car becomes meaningful. If we decide too early that a stranger came, then every odd car becomes meaningful. If we decide too early that a stranger came, then every odd car becomes meaningful. If we decide too early that a stranger came, then every odd car becomes meaningful. It tells us both what she saw and what she could not yet understand. David, younger still, could not give the file a narrative. Their silence was not empty, it was simply the silence of age. You can think of the house after the first day, not as a case scene only, but as a home missing its center. Toys still existed. Beds still needed sheets. Meals still had to happen. Adults still had to decide what to tell children when the answer was not there. The investigation moved through official channels, but grief and confusion moved through rooms. That human element matters because every cold case is lived before it is archived. The police reports themselves must have had a different texture as the days passed. The first reports would be immediate, practical, filled with times, names, and observations. Later reports would gather tips, eliminate possibilities, record negative results. A negative result can be useful, but it is wearying. No match, no sighting confirmed, no hospital record, no body found, no vehicle identified. You can hear the slow accumulation of no, each one making the file thicker and the path narrower. As weeks became months, the kitchen no longer held fresh smells or fresh marks. The physical scene returned, at least outwardly, to being a room. But for investigators and family, it could not become ordinary again. That is one of the strange things about places touched by unresolved events. Other people may see a sink and a table. Those who know the file see the last confirmed boundary of a life. The Risch kitchen became, in memory, a quiet room that never finished speaking. Public interest can keep a case alive, but it can also add layers of speculation. In the Risch case, later readers have often chosen the theory that feels most compelling to them. Some are drawn to the library books, some to the blood trail, some to the road sightings, some to the idea of construction. Each person follows the detail that seems brightest. But a cold case is not solved by brightness alone. It is solved, when it is solved, by corroboration, by one detail meeting another in a way that cannot be easily undone. We can let ourselves notice the emotional appeal of each theory without surrendering to it. The voluntary disappearance theory appeals because it gives Joan agency and explains the absence of a body. The abduction theory appeals because it explains the distress in the kitchen and the suddenness of the vanishing. The wandering theory appeals because it preserves the possibility that the kitchen evidence was real but not fatal. The construction theory appeals because it explains the distress in the kitchen and the suddenness of the vanishing. The wandering theory appeals because it preserves the possibility that the kitchen evidence was real but not fatal. You turn one on, and a corner appears. You turn on another, and a different shape emerges. But the center remains dim. Patient detective work does not punish the dark by inventing light. It keeps checking the bulbs, the switches, the old wiring, and the shadowed floor, because sometimes the answer is not absent forever. Sometimes it is only hidden by the limits of a time. The limits of time include record keeping. In 1961, many everyday movements were not recorded at all. A person could drive across town without electronic trace. A store purchase might leave only a paper receipt, if that. A phone call from a home line might not produce a useful log for investigators. A person could check books out of a library with a card and a stamp. You can feel how open the world was in that sense, and how difficult that openness made disappearance. There were no cell phones to place Joan near a tower, no digital photographs from a passerby. No doorbell camera catching a vehicle. No searchable social media posts from someone who saw a woman walking. The investigation depended on people noticing, remembering, and reporting. Some did. Many had nothing to offer. The silence of technology in older cases is not peaceful, exactly, but it has a kind of deep stillness. The past leaves fewer fingerprints on itself. That stillness is part of the sleep-like atmosphere of old files, but we should not confuse calm with ease. For those who lived it, the uncertainty was not gentle, it was daily. Every phone call might matter. Every unidentified woman found elsewhere might have to be checked. Every rumor might reopen worry. The family did not receive the comfort of knowing. The detectives did not receive the satisfaction of closing. The town did not receive an explanation that could be folded and put away. You and I return now to the first official hours, because the earliest investigation shaped everything that followed. Once police saw the kitchen, they had to decide whether they were dealing with an injured missing person, a possible crime, or something staged. Those categories overlap, but they guide resources differently. Search parties, lab work, interviews, and public alerts all compete for attention. In the Risch case, the evidence demanded all of them at once. That is a heavy burden for any small department. Lincoln was not a large city with endless personnel. Local officers had to work with state police and other resources. But the first response came from people who knew the area as a community, not an abstraction. That can help, because local knowledge knows roads, neighbors, and habits. It can also hurt, because a truly unusual event may exceed what a quiet town is ready to process. You can imagine the police station's atmosphere, the worn floor, the ringing phone, the smell of paper, wool uniforms, and coffee, as the case grew larger than the town expected. State police involvement brought broader investigative capacity, but not a magic answer. Wider authority means more interviews, more coordination, more ways to search, and more experience with serious cases. Yet if the essential facts are ambiguous, a larger net may still come up wet and empty. The Risch case did not need only manpower. It needed a decisive clue. It needed someone who saw clearly, something preserved perfectly, or a trace that could speak beyond doubt. None arrived. The press asked questions too, and the public learned the most memorable pieces quickly. A woman gone from her home, blood in the kitchen, children nearby, possible sightings. These are the details that lodge in public memory because they are simple enough to repeat. But the actual file was more complicated than the headline version. You and I can feel the difference between a headline and a folder. A headline points, a folder weighs. In the folder, names repeat, times are corrected or compared. A sighting is followed by a question mark. A road is measured. A statement is taken in one wording and remembered later in another. There may be maps, clippings, lab notes, and handwritten margins. The paper itself becomes part of the passage of time, soft at the edges, marked by staples and old photocopy shadows. To sit with such a file is to accept slowness as the only honest pace. Joan's description would have been circulated. Her height, build, hair, clothing, and last known circumstances would be repeated by officers and newspapers. People would look at strangers with new attention. A woman walking by a road might suddenly become important. A person in a bus station might be compared in memory to a photograph. This is how the public helps, imperfectly but earnestly. In the Risch case, that help produced leads, but no verified path. The absence remained intact. Clothing details in missing person cases can be especially fragile. Witnesses may remember colors better than styles, or styles better than colors. A coat can be mistaken in low light. A scarf can change a person's outline. If Joan left the house, what she wore mattered greatly. But if witnesses were uncertain, clothing could not anchor the day firmly. You can imagine detectives asking, again and again, was it a grey coat? Was it a dress? Was there something red? Which direction was she walking? Each answer helped, but not enough. The purse left behind has its own quiet gravity. A purse in that era could hold money, identification, keys, personal items, and the small private archive of a person's daily life. Leaving it behind suggests haste, distress, or lack of intention to be gone long. Yet people in sudden states do leave essential things. People staging an absence may leave them for effect. People taken away have no chance to collect them. The purse is another object that leans several ways at once. Keys matter in the same manner. If Joan's car remained, and if her ordinary belongings remained, then the simplest planned departure becomes harder to see. But it does not vanish entirely, because determined people sometimes prepare in hidden ways. Investigators had to ask about bank accounts, letters, friends, family contacts, and any sign of unhappiness or plan. Public accounts have never provided a confirmed hidden life. The question therefore stays open, but faint, like a pencil mark nearly rubbed away. There were no reliable later contacts from Joan. No confirmed letter came after the disappearance to explain where she had gone. No documented new identity emerged that could withstand scrutiny. This absence is important because voluntary disappearance, over years and decades, often leaves some trace, especially when a person has children. Not always, but often. The Risch case offers no such confirmed trace. You can feel the silence stretching beyond the kitchen, beyond Lincoln, beyond 1961, into the long decades afterward. A body was never found, and that fact gave the case its continuing openness. Without Joan found alive or dead, no single category could close around her. Legally and emotionally, disappearance occupies a difficult place. It asks families to grieve and hope in the same breath. It asks investigators to keep possibilities alive long after ordinary probability has narrowed them. You and I should let that difficulty remain gentle, not tidy. The unknown is not a twist. It is a long room with no far wall. Cold cases that last for decades often become almost separated from the day they began. They enter books, online discussions, anniversary articles, and local memory. People born long after the event learn the details and feel certain that modern eyes can solve what older eyes missed. Sometimes modern eyes do help. Sometimes old DNA, old fingerprints, or old records become new again. But sometimes the missing piece was never preserved or was never seen, and time has only carried it farther away. For the Risch case, the challenge is not a lack of interest. It is the quality of the evidence. Much of it is circumstantial, observational, or ambiguous. The blood proves injury or the presence of blood, not necessarily what caused it or where Joan went. The sightings suggest movement, not identity. The books suggest interest, not intention. The car suggests she did not drive herself away unless another sequence occurred. The kitchen suggests disruption, not a single cause. Each fact speaks softly, and none speaks alone. You can imagine a cold case unit, years later, placing the Risch file on a table beneath brighter modern lights. The room would be different from the old station. Computers would hum. Evidence protocols would be stricter. Investigators might look at old photographs on screens, enlarging corners, comparing reports, checking whether any physical evidence remained. They would bring fresh eyes, but they would still meet the same old silence. Fresh eyes cannot see what was never captured. If physical evidence remained, questions of preservation would matter. Was it stored properly? Was it contaminated by earlier handling? Was there enough material to test? Did chain of custody allow confidence? These are not dramatic questions, but they determine whether science can be useful. You can feel the sober patience in them. Before a modern test can answer a mystery, someone has to know whether the old envelope, slide, swab, or fabric can still be trusted. Many older cases suffer because evidence was kept according to the standards of its own time, not the standards of a future no one could imagine. That is not always negligence. A detective in 1961 could not be expected to preserve every trace for DNA analysis that did not yet exist. He might save what seemed important for blood typing, comparison, or court. Decades later, investigators may wish he had saved more. That wish is understandable, but history cannot be retrofitted. The Risch case sits squarely in that painful transition between old methods and modern hopes. It began before the forensic revolution that later helped solve long cold cases. It has lasted into a time when people naturally ask whether old evidence could finally speak. That question remains one of the quietest forms of hope in cold case work. Somewhere, perhaps, a box still holds something, or perhaps it does not. The answer may depend on storage rooms, labels, luck, and the choices of people long gone. While we sit with that thought, we should return to Joan as a living person again. She was not merely the subject of theories. She had a morning before the afternoon. She had spoken to people, handled errands, cared for children, and moved through familiar tasks. The ordinary morning matters because it resists the temptation to treat her disappearance as if it began only with the blood. A life does not begin at the moment it becomes mysterious. Her dental appointment with Lillian gives the day a particular domestic calm before everything changes. A child at a dentist's office. A mother waiting, perhaps magazines on a table. The clean smell of antiseptic. The muted whir of tools behind a door. Afterward, there may have been a stop at a store, the small exchange of money, a bag carried to the car. You can picture Joan guiding her daughter through the day with the quiet competence of a parent managing time. Nothing, in that image, announces itself as final. Back home, the house would have received them as houses do, with familiar light and familiar tasks. Perhaps lunch needed arranging. Perhaps David needed attention after being with the neighbor. Perhaps there were dishes, mail, and small interruptions. The ordinariness is not filler. It is the fabric from which the mystery was torn. You and I let it remain visible because it helps keep the Risch case grounded in life, not only in absence. The timing around the children matters deeply. David had been at the Barker home earlier, then was brought back. Lillian had been playing outside or nearby. At some point, Joan was alone enough for whatever happened in the kitchen to occur without a clear adult witness. That space in the timeline may have been brief. It may have been longer. Either way, it was enough. A cold case can open inside the length of an errand, the length of a child's play, the length of a neighbor's glance away. When Lillian came home and found the kitchen changed, she did what a child would do. She went to a trusted adult. Her description of red paint brought Barbara Barker to the house. You can feel the transition there, from child language to adult alarm. A child tries to fit the room into something known. An adult sees that the known words do not fit. The Risch case entered official life through that small handoff between innocence and recognition. Barbara's call to police was not simply a report of an unusual room. It was an act of neighborly care. She responded because something was wrong in a home close to hers, involving a mother and children she knew. Cold case files can make witnesses seem like pieces on a board, but they were people making decisions in real time. You can imagine her pulse quickening, the phone cool in her hand, the words chosen as best she could manage. There was no script for such a call. Sergeant McHugh's arrival gave the scene its first official witness. The first officer's impressions often shape the language everyone else uses later. What he saw, what he touched or avoided touching, whom he spoke to first, and how he secured the space all mattered. In a small town, he may have known the family or known of them. That kind of familiarity can make a scene feel even less abstract. You can imagine the professional stillness required to step into a neighbor's tragedy and begin taking notes. From that point, the file began to form around observed facts. Blood in kitchen, telephone disturbed, receiver in wastebasket, child safe, mother missing, car present, neighbor statements needed. Search required. Each phrase might have been written quickly, but behind each phrase was a room, a child, a husband being contacted, a neighborhood beginning to understand that the afternoon had changed. The Risch case, as we know it now, was being assembled line by line. Some lines in a report become famous because later readers repeat them. Others remain quiet, but may have mattered just as much. The exact position of a stain, the location of a towel, the time a neighbor came home, whether a door was open or closed, whether the weather had been dry or damp. You learn, reading old cases, that every line is a possible hinge. Most never swing open, but a detective cannot know that while writing them down. Weather is another quiet witness. Late October in Massachusetts can give a day cool air, fallen leaves, and uneven light. If it had rained recently, the ground might hold tracks differently. If it was dry, leaves and dust might shift underfoot without preserving much. Wind can move scent. Temperature can affect search conditions. These are humble details, but they matter. You can feel the chill around the edges of the Risch case, not as atmosphere invented for storytelling, but as the physical world through which everyone moved. The house's location shaped witness possibilities. A home set back from the road gives privacy, but privacy can become a barrier when something goes wrong. Neighbors may see only parts of a driveway, parts of a yard, or a figure moving between trees. Passing drivers may see nothing at all. You can stand at the edge of Old Bedford Road in your mind, listening to a car pass, then another stretch of quiet. The road observes only what happens directly upon it. The rest belongs to trees, distance, and chance. Chance is an uncomfortable word in detective work, but it appears often. Whether a neighbor looks up, whether a dog catches scent, whether a driver remembers a license plate, whether a body is found by a hunter, a worker, or a child years later. In the Risch case, chance offered fragments, but not enough. It gave a child's discovery, a neighbor's possible sighting, public tips, and theories. It did not give the final witness. The investigation would have had to separate what was known from what was assumed. Known, Joan was missing. Known, the kitchen contained blood. Known, the car remained. Known, the children were alive. Known, she had been seen earlier that day. Assumed, something violent may have happened. Assumed, she may have tried to call. Assumed, the sightings may be her. Assumed, the library books may matter. You can see how easily assumptions gather around known facts like dust along a shelf. Dust is not useless, but it must not be mistaken for wood. That is a simple way to think about it as we sit with the file. The true structure of the case is made of verifiable facts. Around that structure, speculation settles, sometimes lightly, sometimes thickly. Patient investigation brushes gently, not to erase every possibility, but to see what is solid underneath. In the Risch case, the solid pieces remained too few to build an ending. The family history has sometimes been drawn into theories because Joan had known early loss. Some have wondered whether past trauma could have influenced a voluntary disappearance. It is a delicate subject, and we handle it softly. Human grief does not translate neatly into future action, and a painful history is not evidence by itself. Joan's childhood losses may help us understand the depth of her life, but they cannot be used carelessly to explain her vanishing. People are more than the worst things they endured. What we can say is that Joan had built a life after loss. She studied, worked, married, had children, and created a home. That tells us about resilience, though even that word is too small for a whole person. If she was troubled privately, the public record has not given a clear answer. If she was content, that too does not solve the case. Human interiors are not always visible to neighbors, relatives, or police. The Risch case reminds us how much of a person remains private, even under investigation. Martin Risch's position in the story was difficult in a different way. He was away when Joan disappeared, then returned to a home transformed into a scene of inquiry. Investigators had to account for him, as they would for any spouse, and public curiosity would naturally look toward him. But no resolution came through that route. For him, as for the children, the case became a lived absence rather than an intellectual puzzle. The old file holds that human burden quietly in the background. A spouse in a missing person case often becomes both witness and sufferer. He must answer questions, provide timelines, describe habits, identify belongings, and endure the scrutiny that serious investigations require. That does not mean suspicion is the story. It means the nearest people hold necessary information. You can imagine the exhaustion of that process, the repetition of times and errands, the effort to remember what was said before leaving for New York, the helplessness of being elsewhere when everything changed. The trip to New York became one of the day's time anchors. Martin's absence was not a vague claim. It was part of the business routine and could be checked. That distance matters because it made Joan's day at home more solitary in practical terms. The household's adult presence was gone. Neighbors and children formed the immediate circle. If someone came to the door, or if something happened inside, there was no other adult in the house to intervene or later explain. The children's ages also created vulnerability in the timeline. They could move in and out of adult awareness without providing adult clarity. A small child may nap, cry, play, or wait without understanding the larger order of events. An older child may notice what frightens her, but not what preceded it. In the Risch case, childhood preserved a single unforgettable impression and left much else untouched. You can feel the sadness of that, because it is no one's fault. The investigation did what it could with neighbors. It asked who had been home, who had left, who saw Joan, who saw cars, who heard noises, who noticed strangers. Door-to-door work has a steady rhythm. Knock, wait, introduce, ask, write. The smell of someone's hallway, the sound of a dog behind a door, the rustle of a person searching memory. It is unglamorous work, and in cold cases, it is often the foundation of everything. Some neighbors may have remembered nothing unusual and felt ashamed of that. But nothing unusual is also a report. It helps define the soundscape and movement of the day. If no one heard shouting, that matters, though it does not prove there was none. If no one saw a stranger, that matters, though it does not prove there was none. Absence of observation has to be placed carefully, like a thin sheet of glass. It can protect a theory or cut it, depending on how it is held. The case may have included reports of a strange vehicle, but without a firm identification. Vehicles become one of the most difficult kinds of leads. Cars were common. Colors were remembered imperfectly, and license plates vanished from memory almost as soon as a car turned a corner. You can picture an officer writing down make, model, color, direction, perhaps adding a question mark. A car can feel so concrete in a story, with chrome, dust, tires, and a rear window. Yet without a plate or driver, it becomes almost mist. If a vehicle was involved, it may have provided the break between the kitchen and the wider world. Joan could have been moved beyond the neighborhood quickly, leaving the searchers nearby at a disadvantage. But that idea needs support. A vehicle seen vaguely near the time does not prove involvement. Many roads hold many cars. The Risch case keeps asking us to distinguish between opportunity and evidence. They can look similar from a distance, but they are not the same thing. The blood trail toward the car complicates vehicle theories in another way. If Joan moved to her own car, or if someone moved near it, why not use it? Perhaps another car was waiting. Perhaps she reached it and then turned away. Perhaps the marks are not a trail in the straightforward sense. Each possibility rearranges the scene slightly. You and I return to the driveway, hearing gravel underfoot, feeling the cold edge of the car door handle in the mind, and still the car remains silent. The car itself would have been examined for stains, fingerprints, and signs of use. A family car carries ordinary traces from many days, so finding meaning can be difficult. Children ride in it. Groceries sit in it. Mud and dust collect. Hands touch handles without consequence. Investigators had to decide what belonged to the 24th of October and what belonged to ordinary life. That separation is never as clean as one wishes, especially in a busy household. A household with children is full of movement. Clothing gets dropped. Towels migrate. Toys appear underfoot. Small stains and smears can have innocent origins until the day they do not. The Risch kitchen was not a sterile room where every mark had to be new. It was lived in. That liveliness, which should have made it comforting, made the evidence harder to read. You can sense the investigators trying to hear one clear note inside a room full of ordinary echoes. This is why old photographs, if available, become so important. They freeze placement before memory can rearrange it further. But photographs from that era had limits too. Angles might be few, color might be absent or unreliable, scale might not be clear, a shadow might hide what later eyes wish to see. You can imagine a black and white print under a magnifying glass, its glossy surface reflecting the lamp as someone looks for a detail the photographer did not know to emphasize. Reports become another form of preservation. A well-written report can carry a room forward through time. A poor one can let details dissolve. In the Risch case, enough detail survived to keep discussion alive for decades, but not enough to close the matter. That imbalance is its own kind of ache. We know too much to let the case fade completely, and too little to let it rest. The file remains open in the mind because it is neither blank nor complete. As time moved beyond the first days, investigators would have had to follow tips farther from Lincoln, a possible sighting elsewhere, a woman matching Joan's description, a report from another town. Each lead takes time. Officers call, travel, compare photographs, speak to local police, and mark a result. Most leads in missing person cases end quietly. The woman is someone else. The date is wrong. The memory cannot be confirmed. Each ending is small, but many small endings become a long, cold road. The newspapers kept the case in circulation for a while, and public awareness may have helped generate leads. But public attention also fades. Other events come. Other headlines fill the page. A missing woman's name appears less often, then only on anniversaries or when a new theory surfaces. Detectives continue where they can, but active urgency gives way to periodic review. That is how many cold cases cool, not suddenly, but gradually, like a cup left untouched on a desk. In the Risch case, the cooling may have felt especially unjust because the first scene was so strong. People expect strong scenes to produce strong answers. The mind thinks, surely a kitchen with blood, a pulled phone, children nearby, and possible sightings must lead somewhere. But evidence does not owe us proportion. A vivid beginning can lead to an empty road. A tiny overlooked trace can solve another case entirely. The world is uneven in that way, and investigators learn it reluctantly. The unanswered status likely weighed on those who first worked the case. Detectives often remember the cases that would not close, especially when children were involved or when the missing person seemed to vanish from an ordinary room. They may retire, move desks, change assignments, and still think of a file when autumn comes around. You can imagine someone years later seeing a kitchen telephone or a road in Lincoln and feeling the old questions stir. Cold cases live in memory as well as in archives. Archives themselves have a particular atmosphere. The air is dry or slightly musty. Boxes sit in rows. Labels fade. Metal shelves hold the weight of decades. A file like the Risch case might rest among others, each one containing a person, a family, and an unfinished question. You pull it down carefully in the mind, feeling dust on your fingers, and the past opens with a soft scrape of cardboard. Nothing rushes out, it simply waits to be read again. When a case is reread, the reader often looks for contradictions. Did one witness's time differ from another's? Did a description change? Was a statement interpreted too narrowly? Was a theory favored too soon? These are useful questions, but they must be asked with humility. Old investigations were made by people standing closer to the event than we are. They saw faces, heard tones, visited roads, and smelled rooms we can only reconstruct. We may notice patterns, but they held the day itself. That does not mean the original investigation was perfect. No investigation is. There may have been missed opportunities, uncertain scene preservation, or leads not pursued as fully as later eyes would wish. But criticism from decades away is easiest when the cold pressure of the first day is gone. You and I can be honest without being harsh. The Risch case asks for careful review, not easy blame. A quiet kitchen became a hard problem, and hard problems do not always yield to good intentions. The role of forensic blood interpretation was limited in that era. Today, analysts might consider pattern, volume, transfer, directionality, and DNA, using language and tools more developed than those available then. In 1961, investigators could still observe stains and draw practical conclusions, but the interpretive framework was different. Blood type O could include Joan, but it could include many others. A type can include without identifying. That single distinction held back certainty from the start. If the blood was Joan's, the next question was how it came to be there. If it was not Joan's, the case would become something else entirely, but the common type made exclusion difficult. Modern DNA could potentially answer that, if suitable evidence survived. Without it, the old conclusion remains suspended. You can see how one laboratory limitation in the first week can echo for more than 60 years. The coldness of a case sometimes begins not with neglect, but with a test that can only say so much. The house may have held fingerprints, but homes are naturally layered with them. A stranger's print might matter if recovered from the right place and matched, but without a suspect, fingerprint comparison in that period could be slow and limited. If no useful unknown prints were found, or if prints were smudged, the door remained closed. You can imagine dark powder, a small brush, tape lifting marks from surfaces, and an officer hoping that a ridge pattern might become a name. Hope again needed a database or a suspect to meet it. The possible absence of forced entry adds another quiet question. If there was no sign someone broke in, did Joan open the door willingly? Was the door unlocked, as many suburban doors might have been? Did something happen after she returned from outside? Did an accident begin without another person at all? The door, like the phone and car, does not give a single answer. In a quiet neighborhood, unlocked doors can mean trust, habit, convenience, or nothing at all. Trust is one of the invisible elements in the Risch case. A quiet town, a family home, neighbors close enough to help, children moving between yards. Trust makes life livable. It also creates openings that are hard to reconstruct after something goes wrong. Investigators cannot simply measure trust with a ruler or photograph it on the floor, yet it shapes who might be admitted, who might go unnoticed, and why a person may not react loudly at first. The file contains facts, but the atmosphere of trust surrounds them. We should also notice how domestic labor shaped the day. Joan was not idle at home. She was managing a household. Laundry, children, appointments, meals, cleaning, and errands all create movement that can confuse later interpretation. A towel in the wrong place may be part of cleaning. A shifted object may be part of childcare. A person hurrying may be following a child, carrying laundry, or answering a knock. The Risch kitchen was a working room, not a stage, and that matters. When people later reconstruct the afternoon, they often want every movement to have significance.
But daily life is full of movements that mean nothing. A drawer opened, a basket moved, a table bumped, a phone book pulled out earlier for some ordinary reason. The investigator's challenge is to decide which ordinary movements became part of the extraordinary event. That is a difficult separation. You and I should feel the patience required before we judge any one object too quickly. The phone book detail, if correctly reported, remains one of the more evocative possibilities. An open page, associated with emergency numbers, suggests urgency, or at least the thought of urgency. But it might also have been opened at another time. It might have been moved during the discovery. It might have been interpreted through the later lens of fear. The sound of thin pages turning in a kitchen is easy to imagine. The reason those pages lay open is not. In some versions of the case, people note that Joan had no obvious reason to vanish willingly. In others, they point to possible hidden distress. Both approaches can overreach. Outsiders rarely know the full interior of a marriage, a mind, or a household. But absence of evidence for a plan does matter. It does not prove she did not leave by choice, yet it makes the theory harder to support. The patient path keeps asking for proof, not just psychological possibility. If Joan planned to disappear, she would need some means of support, some route away, some destination or contact, and some ability to remain hidden indefinitely. Investigators looked for those things and did not find them in a way that closed the case. If she left impulsively, the lack of preparation fits better, but the long absence becomes harder to explain. If she was injured and wandered, the lack of preparation fits, but the lack of discovery becomes the problem. Every path shifts the difficulty, none removes it. That shifting difficulty is why the Risch case has endured. It does not present one impossible fact. It presents several facts that each make the others harder. The kitchen suggests a serious event. The amount of blood may suggest survival. The belongings suggest no plan. The sightings suggest movement. The lack of remains suggests either removal, concealment, or survival elsewhere. The lack of confirmed contact argues against survival. You can feel the circle turning slowly, never quite locking. Cold case work often depends on breaking such circles. A new witness can break one. A recovered body can break one. A confession can break one. A forensic match can break one. Even a small administrative record, such as a hospital admission under the wrong name, can break one if it aligns with the timeline. But the Risch case has not offered that break. It continues to turn on old evidence, old memory, and old silence. The human mind dislikes circles. It wants a line from cause to effect, from kitchen to road, from road to answer. Sleep, perhaps, asks something gentler of us. It lets us sit with a circle without needing to straighten it tonight. We can turn the pages slowly, notice the same objects returning, and allow them to remain unresolved. That is not giving up on Joan. It is honoring the truth that the file has not yet provided more. Over the decades, the case became known beyond Lincoln, partly because it contains elements that feel almost literary: the quiet suburb, the vanished mother, the blood-marked kitchen, the books about disappearance. But real lives are not literature, even when their details resemble it. That distinction matters. Joan did not vanish in order to become a mystery. Her family did not live afterward in order to give readers a puzzle. The case's strange shape is real, and so the telling must remain careful. Careful telling also means avoiding cruelty toward the missing person. Speculation can sometimes turn a woman's private reading, grief, or domestic life into accusation. We should not do that. Joan may have been afraid. She may have been injured. She may have been interrupted. She may have left for reasons no one understood. We do not know. The word may is the honest word. It keeps us from speaking over someone who cannot answer. It also means avoiding certainty about witnesses who did their best. A person who saw a woman on a road and later reported it may have been trying to help. If mistaken, that mistake is human. If correct,
That memory may be one of the last pieces of Joan's life. The Risch case depends on such fragile offerings. We accept them gratefully, then examine them gently. A witness is not a machine. A memory is not a tape. There is a quiet loneliness in the idea of Joan walking along a road, if the sightings were truly her. A woman moving through late afternoon, perhaps unsteady, perhaps trying to reach help, perhaps not fully aware of where she was going. We do not need to make that image frightening. It is sad enough as a possibility. You can hear leaves along the shoulder, a car passing, the hollow rush of air afterward. If it was her, someone saw her and did not yet know what they were seeing. If it was not her, then the real Joan's path is even shorter in the confirmed record. She is at home, then absent. The kitchen and driveway become the last true map. That alternative has its own quiet weight. It suggests that whatever happened after the kitchen was hidden quickly, or happened in a way no one witnessed at all. Investigators had to move between these emotional landscapes without letting either one become certainty. That is difficult work, even when described calmly. The case's title, Why the Risch Case Went Cold in a Quiet Kitchen, points us back to the central problem. The coldness did not come from a lack of mystery. It came from too much ambiguity at the origin. The kitchen was not empty of evidence. It was full of evidence that stopped short. A cold case can begin in a barren place, but it can also begin in a crowded room where every object speaks at once, and no object finishes its sentence. You can think of detectives returning to the kitchen in memory after following outside leads. A sighting fails, so the mind goes back to the phone. A vehicle lead fades, so the mind goes back to the driveway. A library theory weakens, so the mind goes back to the blood type. The room becomes the anchor because everything else drifts. Yet an anchor is not a destination. It keeps the investigation from floating away, but it does not bring it to shore. Over time, the family's need for answers did not lessen simply because the public heard less. That is another truth of cold cases. Public attention rises and falls, but private absence is constant. Birthdays pass, children grow, houses change, roads are resurfaced, libraries change their checkout systems, phones disappear from kitchen walls. Yet the question remains shaped like the person who is missing. In the Risch case, that question had Joan's name and Joan's face, and it stayed. The town changed too. Lincoln in later decades was not exactly the Lincoln of 1961. Roads developed, homes changed hands, witnesses aged or moved away, and old landmarks shifted. A place can keep a case and still alter around it. You can stand in the same area years later and feel both nearness and distance. The air may still smell of leaves in October, but the world that held the first investigation is gone. Time becomes another layer over the evidence. That is why early documentation matters so much. Once a road changes or a witness dies, the file may be all that remains. A measurement, a statement, a photograph, a newspaper clipping, each becomes a small bridge back to the original day, but a bridge only reaches where it was built to reach. If no one measured a certain distance, later readers must estimate. If no one photographed a certain angle, later eyes must imagine. The gaps are permanent unless a new source appears. In the Risch case, the most meaningful new source would be something that connects Joan's disappearance to a definite event or person. A preserved biological sample, a verified confession, a confirmed burial site, a forgotten police note, a witness who withheld information and later spoke. These are possibilities, but we should not treat them as promises. Many cold cases do not receive their late answer. Some remain open because the final link was never available to be found. Even so, investigators keep files because time can change circumstances. A person who was afraid to speak may later feel able. A family secret may surface. Technology may change. Records once difficult to compare may become searchable. A partial memory may connect to a name in another file. This is the patient hope of cold casework. and it is a modest hope, not a dramatic one. It sits quietly, like a lamp left on in an archive room. As you sit with the Risch file, the patience of the detectives becomes almost as important as the facts themselves. They had to tolerate uncertainty without letting it become numbness. They had to ask repeated questions without becoming careless. They had to revisit old ground without assuming old ground was empty. That kind of work is not fast. It is made of persistence, paper, phone calls, and the willingness to say, "We still do not know," while continuing anyway. That sentence, "We still do not know," has a calm honesty to it. It is not satisfying, but it is clean. It does not pretend. The Risch case asks for that honesty again and again. We still do not know exactly what happened in the kitchen. We still do not know whether the sightings were Joan. We still do not know whether the sightings were Joan. We still do not know whether another person entered the house. We still do not know whether the sightings were Joan. We still do not know whether another person entered the house. Yet within those unknowns, there are known human actions. A neighbor helped. Police responded. Searchers looked. Witnesses reported. Family members endured. Later writers and investigators returned. Each action is small beside the missing answer, but not meaningless. Cold case work is sometimes measured not only by closure, but by the refusal to let a person be erased by uncertainty. Joan's name remains spoken because people kept returning to the file. The file's quiet objects also remain. The telephone, no longer an everyday object in modern kitchens, feels especially distant now. Many listeners may picture it as something from another era, fixed to the wall, its cord coiled, its receiver heavy in the hand. That heaviness matters. To call for help required standing in one place, reaching for that object, and speaking into a line tied to the house. If Joan tried to do that, the room holds one kind of meaning. If she did not, the room holds another. The children's rooms may have been searched, the basement and closets checked, the yard walked, all with the practical thoroughness of people hoping for a simple explanation first. Perhaps she had fainted, perhaps she was outside, perhaps she had gone to a neighbor. Early searching often carries hope, even while fear grows. You can imagine calling her name through a house, listening for any answer from behind a door or down a stair. The lack of response changes the air. The basement, if searched, would have had its own smells of concrete, stored items, dust, and cool air. The attic or closets, if checked, would have given only coats, boxes, and the ordinary privacy of a home. Each empty place would narrow one possibility and widen another. This is the rhythm of search. A room cleared is both relief and disappointment. It means she is not there, and therefore she is still somewhere else. Outside, the woods and road edges would require a different kind of attention. Leaves hide uneven ground. Brush catches clothing. Ditches hold shadows. Searchers must look slowly and systematically, but also cover distance before weather, darkness, and time reduce what can be seen. In the Risch case, no search brought Joan home. The land around Old Bedford Road did not yield the answer then, and later searching faced the added difficulty of change. The possible construction area remains one of those ideas people return to because it explains the failure of discovery without requiring a long-hidden life. If earth was moved, if a person ended up where workers later filled or paved, then absence could persist for decades. But as with so much else, the idea is plausible without being proven. You can see the machinery in the distance, hear engines under the gray sky, and still know that imagination is not evidence. Another possibility sometimes raised is that Joan may have encountered someone while outside, after leaving the kitchen. In that version, the kitchen event begins one story, and an outside encounter creates another. This would help explain why the room suggests injury, while the disappearance suggests removal. But it requires a chain of chance events, each difficult to prove. A woman injured or confused leaves. Someone sees or finds her. Something happens away from the house. The body is never found. It can be imagined, but not fixed. The Risch case is like that throughout, with scenarios that can be told coherently if one supplies missing links. The problem is that the links are supplied by us, not by the file. A responsible retelling must mark the difference. We can say, this could explain one part. We cannot say, therefore it happened. You and I keep our hands open around the possibilities. Nothing is forced shut. In sleep, a story can be unresolved without becoming restless, if the voice stays patient, so we let the case breathe. We do not chase every rumor. We do not sharpen every uncertainty into accusation. We sit in the quiet kitchen, then walk to the driveway, then out to the road, then back again. The movement is slow because that is how the case has always moved, from fact to question, from question to fact, and never quite beyond. The next layer is the way the Risch case was shaped by what people expected a missing mother to do. Many found it hard to believe Joan would leave her children. That instinct is powerful and understandable, but investigators must be careful with expectations, because people sometimes act outside them. At the same time, expectations cannot be dismissed entirely because they are based on real knowledge of a person's habits, attachments, and responsibilities. The file has to hold both compassion and skepticism. People who knew Joan described her in ways that did not easily support voluntary abandonment. She was educated, engaged in family life, and moving through normal responsibilities. Yet outward descriptions cannot see every private interior. This is why the voluntary theory persists without becoming dominant for many careful readers. It has possible supporting details, but it asks a great deal of the human context. You can feel the imbalance, though you cannot quite weigh it on a scale. The abduction theory asks different things. It asks us to believe someone entered or approached without being clearly identified, created or contributed to the kitchen evidence, and removed Joan without leaving enough trace to be caught. That is also possible, and also difficult. The house was in a neighborhood, children and neighbors were nearby, and daylight had not fully gone. But daylight does not prevent wrongdoing, and neighborhoods do not see everything. Again, the file refuses a simple dismissal. The accident and wandering theory asks us to believe Joan left the house after an injury and was somehow lost without discovery. That may feel unlikely in a searched area, but not impossible. People have disappeared in places that seemed too small or too familiar to hide them. Terrain, weather, water, construction, and chance can defeat searchers. Yet the lack of later discovery remains a serious weight against easy acceptance. The theory is gentle, but not complete. Every theory has its burden. That is a useful phrase to keep beside the file. The burden of staging is motive and later survival. The burden of abduction is an unidentified actor and clean removal. The burden of wandering is failed discovery. The burden of accident alone is total disappearance. No theory walks lightly. Each carries something heavy through the quiet kitchen and out into the road. A case goes cold when those burdens remain and no new fact arrives to shift them. Investigators may keep one theory in mind more than others, but without proof, they cannot close the file. Prosecutors cannot act on atmosphere. Families cannot grieve on speculation alone. Newspapers can write. Readers can wonder. But the official question remains. Where is Joan Risch? What happened after the kitchen? Who, if anyone, knows? The question who knows is its own quiet corridor. If another person was involved, that person may have lived for years with knowledge never shared. He or she may have died long ago. A witness may have known something small and not understood its importance. A child may have heard an adult mention a car or a road and forgotten until too late. Cold cases sometimes depend on knowledge hidden in ordinary lives. The Risch case may be one of them, or it may not. If no other person knows, then the answer may rest only with the landscape and the lost sequence of Joan's own actions. That possibility feels different. It removes the idea of a secret keeper and leaves only mischance, injury, confusion, and time. Some unsolved cases have no villain in the final sense, only a chain of circumstances no one could reconstruct. The Risch case allows that possibility too. The kitchen may have been the site of harm, or only the beginning of a tragic wandering. We can feel the investigators' difficulty in not knowing which kind of case they had. A missing person case can become a criminal case, a medical emergency, a voluntary absence, or an accident. Early classification shapes public alerts, evidence handling, search strategies, and interview tone. But the Risch case resisted classification from the start. It sat at the crossing of several paths, and each hour spent on one path risked losing time on another. That is not a failure of attention. It is the burden of ambiguity. As the file aged, ambiguity hardened into legend. People repeated the most memorable details, sometimes without the cautious language the original facts required. The blood became more dramatic. The books became more intentional. The sightings became either dismissed or embraced, depending on the teller. This happens to many old cases. Retelling polishes some details until they shine brighter than they should. A calm retelling tries to return the shine to a softer finish, closer to the evidence itself. The phrase "quiet kitchen" helps us do that. It brings us back to the small room, not as a stage for fear, but as a place where ordinary life and unanswered questions met. A sink, a wall phone, a table, a wastebasket, linoleum underfoot, light through the windows, a child's misunderstanding, a neighbor's concern, a police officer's first look. These are enough. We do not need to add anything harsher. The facts are already weighty in their restraint. You may find after sitting with the case for a while that the most haunting detail is not the blood or the books, but the simple nearness of help. Neighbors were close. The phone was close. The car was close. Roads were close. Yet none of those nearnesses saved the day from becoming unknown. That is a quiet truth about human life. We can be surrounded by ordinary forms of safety, and still a small gap can open where no one is looking. It is important not to turn that into fear. The purpose here is not to make a listener uneasy in the dark. It is to notice the humility old mysteries teach. We do not see everything. We cannot always reconstruct the moment that matters. We rely on one another, on memory, on records, on people who keep asking. The Risch case, for all its sadness, is also a record of people trying. The trying did not solve it, but it mattered. Years after the disappearance, those who revisited the case often looked for new ways to arrange the same facts. What if the kitchen was staged? What if the blood came from a self-inflicted accident? What if the sighted woman was Joan? What if she had read those books for a reason? What if a road crew unknowingly covered the answer? Each what if has a soft sound, almost like pages turning. But a what if, by itself, cannot carry us over the gap. The gap remains between Joan in the known day and Joan after. We can narrow it with timings, sightings and objects, but we cannot close it. That is where the file becomes cold. Not frozen exactly, because people still think of it, but cold in the official sense, without the heat of active leads. A case can be warm with memory and cold with evidence at the same time. The Risch case is very much that kind of case. When cold case detectives reopen a file like this, they often begin by building a clean timeline. Every known event is placed in order, and every uncertain event is marked as uncertain. This may sound simple, but it is an act of discipline. It prevents a theory from placing a sighting where it wants the sighting to be. It prevents memory from smoothing over gaps. You can see the timeline stretched across a table, each entry a small island of paper with blank water between. Then they examine evidence categories: physical evidence, witness statements, victimology, geographic movement, suspect development, if any, media coverage, prior theories. The process is quiet and methodical. It does not resemble a sudden revelation. It resembles housekeeping of the most serious kind, dusting the shelves of a life and an investigation, looking for anything that was placed in the wrong spot. In the Risch case, such review would return again and again to the kitchen, because that is where the strongest physical facts live. Victimology, the study of Joan's life and circumstances, would ask about relationships, routines, stresses, habits, health, finances, and communications. It is a practical area, but it must be handled with compassion. A missing person's private life should not be turned into gossip. The purpose is to understand risk, opportunity, and behavior. For Joan, public information offers a picture of education, family responsibility, and no confirmed plan to vanish. That picture matters, but it remains incomplete, as all human pictures do. Geographic review would ask, what routes were possible on foot, by car, and through nearby land? It would consider how far an injured person might travel, where a vehicle could stop unnoticed, where construction was active, and what areas were searched. Maps from the time would matter more than modern maps, because roads and land use change. You can imagine tracing a finger along an old paper map, the crease lines soft from folding, the names of roads holding the shape of a vanished afternoon. Witness review would separate confirmed observations from possible ones. It would ask how soon after the disappearance each statement was made, whether the witness knew Joan, how far away the sighting was, what the lighting was, and whether later publicity may have influenced memory. This is delicate work. It does not accuse witnesses of dishonesty. It simply respects the limits of seeing. In the Risch case, possible sightings are too important to ignore and too uncertain to settle the matter. Physical evidence review would be the most tantalizing and perhaps the most frustrating. Does anything still exist? If so, can it be tested? If tested, would the result answer a meaningful question? A DNA profile from blood, for example, might confirm whether the blood was Joan's, but if it was hers, many questions remain. If it was someone else's, the case could change dramatically, but that depends on evidence, preservation, and luck. Cold cases often ask luck to return after decades away. Luck, though, is not the same as passivity. Investigators preserve, catalogue, re-examine, and compare so that if luck appears, they are ready for it. A family member gives a sample, a database changes, a witness calls, a box is found mislabeled, the patient work prepares the ground. In the Risch case, every careful retelling keeps the name and facts accessible, not to solve by imagination, but to prevent forgetting. For a sleep listener, that may be the softest place to rest for a moment. The file is open, the lamp is low, and we are not forcing an answer out of the paper. We are simply keeping company with the patient work. The kitchen does not have to explain itself tonight. The road does not have to lead us all the way. Joan's name can be spoken gently, and the unknown can remain unknown without becoming a sharp thing. Still, we continue, because the case has more layers to consider, and the next one lies in the way ordinary records, library cards, newspaper columns, and remembered errands tried to hold a woman's life after the kitchen could not. The ordinary records are quiet things, and in the Risch case they become a kind of shoreline, because when a person disappears from sight, paper is often where investigators first try to find her again. You can picture the library card, the dental appointment, the shopping stop, the household routines, each one laid gently on the table beside the kitchen photographs. None of them explains everything, but each one says Joan was here. Joan moved through this day. Joan left marks in the usual places before the unusual silence began. The dental appointment is one of those marks, small and useful because it belongs to the morning before the uncertainty. A scheduled visit has a time, a place, perhaps a receptionist who remembered the mother and child, perhaps a notation in a book that smelled of ink and office dust. You can imagine the waiting room chairs, the faint clean scent of antiseptic, the rustle of a magazine turned by someone not really reading. The appointment placed Joan in ordinary public life that day, calm enough to keep a child's routine. After the dentist, the errands matter because they continue that ordinary line. Joan was not reported as acting dramatically out of place, not moving like someone already cut loose from her life. She was doing what many parents do, making small, necessary stops, guiding a child from one place to another, returning home with the day still partly unfinished. The Risch case becomes more puzzling because of that ordinary morning. It does not give us a long visible descent into disappearance. It gives us errands, then a kitchen. You and I should linger with that transition, because it is where the file quietly tightens. Morning records can account for Joan with practical steadiness. Afternoon evidence can account for the house with unsettling detail. Between those two, the bridge is narrow, made of neighbor sightings, children's movements, and the silence of a few rooms. Detectives had to walk that bridge again and again, testing whether any board gave way. No board broke loudly enough to reveal the hidden space below. The shopping stop, like the dental appointment, also shows how much investigation depends on people doing ordinary jobs. A clerk may remember a customer only because police later ask. A receipt may preserve a time more faithfully than memory. A child may remember a small purchase more than the adult schedule surrounding it. These fragments gather like leaves at the edge of the road. You can brush them aside or study them closely. In the Risch case, every fragment was worth studying because the known day was so short. The return home is harder to hold. Once Joan was back at Old Bedford Road, the record became more dependent on those who lived near her. There were no office ledgers inside the kitchen, no neutral clerk at a counter, no appointment book with a timestamp. There was a family house, children coming and going, a neighbor helping, and an afternoon that did not announce its importance until after it had passed. You can feel how the investigative footing changes there, from paper to memory. Memory has a smell of its own in old cases, if you sit with it long enough. It is not musty exactly, but softened, like paper stored in a drawer with photographs. Witnesses remember what they saw, but also the weather, their own errands, the sound of children, the angle of light, or the feeling that something was normal until it was not. Investigators take those memories and try to make them stand in a straight line. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they lean. In the Risch case, the line leaned most heavily around mid-afternoon. Barbara Barker's possible sighting of Joan near the driveway remains important because it may place Joan outside after the kitchen event, or at least near the time when the event was unfolding. If the sighting was accurate, then Joan was not simply gone from the house without movement. She was seen alive, perhaps carrying something, perhaps moving quickly. But the word perhaps keeps returning, soft and persistent, because memory and interpretation were bound together from the start. You can sit beside that sighting as if it were a photograph, though it was never a photograph. A woman near the driveway, a flash of red, a quick movement, a neighbor seeing without knowing she needed to study. The air may have been cool enough that breath felt thin in the throat, the ground dry with leaves, the afternoon light lowering toward gray. Nothing in that moment said, "Remember this perfectly," so of course it was not remembered perfectly. Few things ever are. That imperfect sighting created one of the case's gentlest and most difficult questions. If Joan was seen moving outside, was she trying to reach someone? Was she carrying clothing, a towel, or something connected to the kitchen? Was she confused? Was she in control of herself? Was the sighting even Joan? You and I do not choose too quickly. We let the questions rest in a row, not like a list shouted into the dark, but like small stones placed on a windowsill. The phrase red paint, from Lillian's child understanding, sits beside the red bundle in the neighbor's memory, and the human mind naturally wants to connect them. It may be right to connect them. It may not be. A child sees red in a kitchen and names the safest thing she knows, A neighbor sees red outside and later understands it differently because of what was found. This is how meaning changes after an event. Detectives had to ask whether the connection was real or only created by the shock of hindsight. The library records add a different kind of hindsight. Before Joan disappeared, the books were only books. Afterward, they seemed to lean toward the case. Some accounts say she had checked out books dealing with disappearance, murder, or missing women, and those titles became part of the public fascination. You can imagine investigators or reporters looking at a list of borrowed books and feeling the strange pull of coincidence. A library shelf can become a mirror after the fact, reflecting the case back at itself. But we have to remember how readers choose books. Sometimes they choose because a title catches the eye. Sometimes because an author is familiar. Sometimes because the weather is gray and a mystery feels companionable. Sometimes because they work with stories or have always liked puzzles. Joan had a background in publishing, and books may have been part of her ordinary mental life. The Risch case does not allow us to turn reading into proof. It only asks us to notice that the detail exists. You can picture the books in the house, perhaps on a table, perhaps near a chair, their jackets worn from other hands. A borrowed book carries many lives before it reaches one reader. Library stamps, pencil marks, soft corners, the faint scent of paper and dust, all make it feel personal while reminding us it was public. If Joan read about disappearance, she was not alone in that curiosity. Many people read such stories and return them without vanishing. The caution is simple, but it matters. Still, investigators would have been wrong to ignore the books entirely. If a person disappears in a way that resembles material she recently read, the resemblance must be considered. Did the books suggest a method? Did they influence behavior? Did they merely create a coincidence that became larger after the fact? Each possibility belongs on the table. You turn one book over in your hands, in thought, and it gives you only a cover, pages, and the quiet knowledge that private reading cannot be cross-examined. This is part of what made the Risch case so enduring. It contains details that feel meaningful but resist measurement. A blood type can be measured, though not enough a book choice can be documented, though not enough printed with certainty. A sighting can be timed, though not confirmed beyond doubt. A household object can be located, though its movement remains unexplained. The case seems to offer many handles, but each handle comes loose when pulled too hard. If we were detectives at the desk tonight, we might make separate folders for each kind of clue. One for the kitchen, one for the timeline, one for sightings, one for Joan's background, one for public tips, one for theories tested and weakened. The folders would help the mind stay orderly. They would not solve the case by themselves. Organization is a kindness in an old mystery, because without it, the questions crowd one another until nothing can be heard. In the kitchen folder, we would return again to the physical layout. Where was the telephone? Where was the wastebasket? Where was the table? Where were the stains? Where did any trail begin and end? A floor plan would matter. Distances matter. The line from sink to phone, from phone to doorway, from doorway to driveway, all could change interpretation. You can feel the slow measuring tape of detective work, stretched across a room that had once needed no measuring at all. In the timeline folder, we would place the morning dental visit, the errands, David's time with the neighbor, Lillian's play, Barbara's possible sighting, Lillian's return to the house, the police call, and Martin's return. Every time would be marked with its source, exact, approximate, disputed, remembered later. Those labels are quiet but powerful. They prevent the timeline from pretending to be firmer than it is. The Risch case needs that honesty, because so much depends on minutes that were not being watched. In the sightings folder, we would keep each report separate at first: a woman on a road, a possible direction of travel, clothing descriptions, time of day, witness location, whether the witness knew Joan, whether the report came before or after newspaper coverage. Only after each sighting is respected on its own should it be compared with the others. That is how patient work avoids building a single imagined woman out of several different strangers seen on different roads. In the background folder, we would place Joan's education, work, family life, reading habits, earlier losses, marriage, children, and recent move to Lincoln. This is not to reduce her to clues, but to understand the life from which she vanished. People disappear from specific lives, not from blank spaces. Joan's life had structure, responsibilities, attachments, and history. Those things help investigators judge which theories fit comfortably, which strain, and which require assumptions that the evidence does not support. In the tips folder, there would be many entries that went nowhere. A clerk thought she saw Joan. A driver remembered someone walking. A person reported an odd car. Someone heard a rumor. Someone knew someone who acted strangely. Most tips fade under examination, but each has to be handled because one could be different. You can imagine the slow handwriting in those records, the phone numbers, addresses, crossouts, and final notes. Checked. No confirmation. Unable to locate witness. Not Joan. That last phrase, not Joan, must have appeared in one form or another, again and again. It is a small phrase with a tired sound. Every time it is written, the search narrows without moving closer. A missing person case produces many false returns. People are seen who resemble the missing. Bodies are found that turn out to be someone else. Stories surface and dissolve. Each false return may bring relief for one family and renewed sorrow for another. In the Risch case, no return became true. The theory folder would be the most tempting to read first, but perhaps it should be read last. Theories are useful after facts are sorted. If read too early, they can teach the eye what to see. The Risch case warns us about that. If we begin with the idea that Joan left willingly, then the books glow too brightly. If we begin with the idea of an intruder, then the phone and table become signs of struggle. If we begin with wandering, then every road sighting feels like a step. Patient work begins elsewhere. The patient place is the fact itself. A child found a troubling kitchen. A neighbor called police. Joan was missing. The blood was type O, compatible with Joan, but common. The car remained. The purse remained. Possible sightings followed. No body was found. No one was charged. Those are the stones underfoot. Everything else is a path we try to build between them. Some paths are more plausible than others, but none has reached the far bank. As the investigation moved into its later stages, the public role changed. Early public appeals asked for immediate help. Later articles asked for memory. Anniversary pieces asked whether anyone still knew something. That shift is important. In the first days, a witness might still recover a fresh detail. Years later, the hope is that conscience, chance, or a newly connected memory will do what fresh observation did not. The Risch case moved from urgent search to long remembering. Long remembering has its own rituals. A date comes around. A local paper revisits the story. A detective is quoted. A family member may speak, or may choose privacy. The same photograph of Joan appears again, and readers look into a face from another era. Hair, clothing, portrait style, all remind us that time has passed. But a face in a photograph is always present in a particular way. It looks back as if no years have moved at all. Photographs can make a cold case feel immediate, and they can also mislead. A single portrait may become the whole public idea of a person. Joan was more than the photograph that survives in articles. She had expressions not captured, moods not recorded, gestures known only to people close to her. You and I remember that because it keeps the case human. The photograph is a doorway, not the room. The newspapers of 1961 were part of the investigation's atmosphere. Ink on paper, folded at breakfast tables, passed between neighbors, clipped and saved. A person reading about Joan might look up from the page and remember a car, A woman, a small oddity from the day before. That was how information spread. It was slower than now, but perhaps more tactile. You can smell the newsprint, feel the crease down the center, see a headline softened by the thumb that holds it. Radio may have carried notices too, and police bulletins would have moved through official channels. Yet the speed of information was still limited. A woman could travel a considerable distance before every relevant person knew to look for her. If Joan left the area willingly or unwillingly, that delay mattered. If she was nearby, the delay mattered differently, through fading scent, darkness, and changing ground. Time was evidence too, but it was evidence that kept evaporating. The first 24 hours of a disappearance are often spoken of as crucial, and in Joan's case, they were especially complicated. The blood in the kitchen suggested something immediate and serious. The possible sightings suggested she might be moving. The children needed care. The husband had to be reached. The house had to be examined. Neighbors had to be questioned. Roads had to be searched. You can feel how 1 hour could be full of 10 necessary tasks, each one urgent in a different way. If investigators searched toward one possible sighting, they might miss another area. If they held back to process the kitchen, they risked losing a living person's trail. If they treated it as a voluntary disappearance too soon, they might undersearch. If they treated it as a crime scene only, they might underfollow sightings. The case's ambiguity was not just theoretical. It shaped decisions while the clock was still moving. That is one reason its coldness began early. The public sometimes imagines investigations as a straight road from clue to clue. In reality, they are often more like walking through a house in low light, touching furniture to orient yourself. You reach a wall where you expected a door. You find a doorway where you expected a closet. You go back. You correct the map. The Risch case required that kind of movement. It was not one road, but a set of rooms connected by uncertain thresholds. One of those thresholds is the question of injury. The kitchen blood indicates someone bled. If it was Joan, then what kind of injury was it? Could she walk? Could she think clearly? Could she speak? Could she drive? Could she seek help? Without a body or medical examination, those questions remain open. The amount of blood may have suggested survival was possible, but possible is not certain. The body, absent from the investigation, withheld the most direct answers. Another threshold is whether the kitchen scene was genuine or staged. Staging is a difficult concept because it assumes a mind trying to manipulate investigators. If the telephone and overturned table were staged, then someone wanted the room to be read a certain way. But staging often leaves its own inconsistencies, and accidents can look staged when viewed after the fact. You can feel the danger of reading intention into every misplaced object. Sometimes a room is confused because events were confused. If Joan staged the room herself, the questions multiply in another direction. Why create such an alarming scene with children nearby? Why leave without essentials? Why never contact anyone if she survived? Why choose a method that invited intense search and public attention? It is not impossible, but it is heavy with unanswered practicalities. We place that theory down gently, not throwing it away, but noticing how much weight it must carry. If someone else staged it, the questions are different. Did that person know Joan's blood type, or simply rely on the scene's impact? Did the person have time to move objects, clean enough to avoid leaving obvious traces, and remove Joan without being seen? Did the staging happen before or after leaving the house? Again, possible does not become proven. The kitchen's strangeness may invite staging theories, but it does not confirm them. If nothing was staged, then the room may reflect a sudden, messy, human sequence. An injury, a failed call, an attempt to clean or move, a trip toward the car, a decision, conscious or confused, to leave. This version feels less deliberate, and perhaps for that reason, more sadly plausible to some readers. But it still has to explain the complete disappearance. The problem in the Risch case is never only the kitchen. It is the kitchen plus the vanishing beyond it. You can see how the case resists closure at every turn. A theory that explains the room fails at the road. A theory that explains the absence fails at the children. A theory that explains the books fails at the blood. A theory that explains the sightings fails at the lack of discovery. Investigators were not choosing between a good answer and a bad one. They were choosing among incomplete answers, knowing that none could be responsibly called final. This is where patience becomes more than a mood. It becomes an ethical stance. To be patient with a cold case is to refuse the comfort of false completion. It is to let the family's uncertainty remain visible rather than covering it with our preferred explanation. You and I can do that tonight. We can keep the file open in front of us, with the lamp pooling light on the page, and let the unanswered parts stay honestly unanswered. Over the years, the Risch case has sometimes been compared to other disappearances where a domestic scene suggested distress, but the person was never found. Comparisons can help investigators think broadly, but they can also blur the uniqueness of a case. Joan's disappearance had its own geography, its own family context, its own timeline, and its own evidence. We can learn from patterns without forcing her story into another person's outline. The file deserves its own shape. Patterns might include voluntary disappearances with staged scenes, accidental injuries followed by wandering, abductions from homes, or delayed discoveries near construction or wilderness. Each pattern offers questions. What evidence usually appears? What evidence is usually absent? How far do people travel when injured? How often do staged scenes include certain features? But patterns are not verdicts. They are lamps carried into the archive, useful only if they illuminate rather than blind. The quiet kitchen remains the main lamp here. Its light is not bright, but it is steady. Every major theory must pass through it. If Joan left voluntarily, why this kitchen? If she was taken, how did the kitchen sequence occur? If she wandered, what injury or confusion began there? If she suffered an accident, why was she not found? The room asks each theory to account for ordinary objects made strange, and each theory answers only partly. You may notice how often the case turns on the difference between likely and known. It may be likely that the blood was Joan's, but it was not uniquely identified as hers by the methods available. It may be likely that a missing mother did not choose to leave her children, but likelihood is not proof. It may be likely that a possible sighting was connected or not connected, depending on the reader's view. Known facts are fewer and therefore more precious. In a cold case file, the known facts should be handled like old glass. They can support a great deal if kept intact, but they can crack under pressure from assumptions. You hold them carefully. Joan was last certainly known in the course of an ordinary day. Her kitchen later showed signs of blood and disturbance. She disappeared. Searches and investigation did not find her. The case remained unsolved. Those facts are plain, and their plainness is enough to make the silence deep. The personal belongings left behind continue to whisper against the idea of a planned departure. A purse is not just practical, it is intimate. It carries the small permissions of daily life, money, identification, perhaps keys, notes, a compact, receipts, the little paper trail a person expects to need. Leaving it behind is a strange thing if one intends to vanish carefully. But strange things happen in crisis, and a staged disappearance might deliberately leave it. Again, the object whispers, but does not testify. Clothing, too, belongs to both practicality and interpretation. What coat was missing? What was Joan believed to be wearing? Did the possible road sightings match? These details may seem simple, but old clothing descriptions often become tangled. A witness remembers a light coat. A family member recalls a darker one. A newspaper prints one version. Later retellings simplify. You and I let the garments remain soft-edged, as fabric often is in memory, the children's clothing marked with blood, if used in wiping or contact, raises another kind of question. Did Joan reach for what was nearby? Did someone else use household items in haste? Were the items already in the kitchen, or brought there? The presence of children's things in family spaces is ordinary, and that ordinariness makes interpretation harder. You can see a small garment on a chair, a towel near the sink, a busy room where nothing was placed for investigators to understand later. That is a key point. The scene was not created to be solved, unless one believes staging. If it was a real sequence, it unfolded for immediate human reasons, not for later clarity. People in distress do not arrange evidence logically. They reach, stumble, wipe, call, move, or leave. Their actions may seem contradictory afterward, because survival, fear, confusion, or pain do not produce neat narratives. The Risch kitchen may look contradictory, because the moment itself was contradictory. The search beyond the house had to wrestle with the same human unpredictability. An injured person does not necessarily take the nearest logical path. A disoriented person may avoid houses, move toward roads, or follow familiar routes without clear purpose. A person being helped or coerced may move in ways no witness expects. Maps show possibilities, but human movement resists neat lines. The Risch case left too little track to decide which kind of movement occurred. Scent dogs, if their work was documented as inconclusive, belong to that difficulty. Dogs can be extraordinary, but they are not magic. Scent conditions, contamination, delay, surfaces, and traffic all matter. A trail can end at a road because a person entered a car, or because scent was lost, or because conditions failed. You can picture a handler watching the dog hesitate, the leash slackening, the road ahead full of possibilities. Even a trained animal may return only uncertainty. Hospitals and clinics would have been checked because an injured woman might appear under confusion or without identification. That search, too, depended on human reporting systems. Calls were made, descriptions were given, staff were asked. But if Joan never reached medical care, those calls could only come back empty. If she did, under another name, records would need to align. No confirmed hospital trace has become part of the solution. The medical route faded, leaving the kitchen's evidence unexplained. Transportation hubs may have been considered if voluntary disappearance remained possible. Train stations, bus depots, taxis, airports, and roads leading away from Massachusetts all offer routes out of a life. Yet a person without a purse, money, or preparation faces practical limits. Someone could help, of course, but then that helper becomes another missing piece. You can feel how every path outward requires either a hidden resource or an unidentified person, and neither appears clearly in the record. The unidentified person, if there was one, is perhaps the largest shadow in the case. Stranger, acquaintance, helper, driver, witness, who never came forward. The file cannot decide whether such a person exists. In some theories, another person is central. In others, no other person is needed until perhaps the later road. In still others, another person appears only as speculation. You and I do not populate the file unnecessarily. We leave the shadow unnamed because the evidence has not given it a face. There is restraint in leaving a shadow unnamed. It would be easy to invent motives, to imagine voices, to write a hidden visitor into the afternoon. But that would change the nature of the telling. The Risch case asks us to stay with what is known and what was seriously considered. If a person came to the house, we do not know who. If Joan left alone, we do not know why. If the road sightings matter, we do not know where they led. The unknown stays simple. Simple unknowns can be more enduring than elaborate ones. Where did she go? What happened in the kitchen? Did anyone else know? These questions have lasted because they are direct and unanswered. They do not need ornament. You can write them on a small index card and place it inside the file, and the card would still hold the whole weight of the case. The rest of the pages try to approach those questions from different angles, but the center remains the same. The long years after 1961 added another layer of difficulty. Witnesses aged, memories changed, physical locations altered, evidence storage became uncertain. People who might have held minor information died without knowing its value. A car once remembered as blue or gray disappeared into scrap. A road shoulder was widened. A library record was discarded. Time does not simply pass over a cold case. It carries pieces away. Yet time can also reduce noise. Rumors fade. False leads are eliminated. Investigators can see which tips survived scrutiny and which did not. A later review may benefit from distance because the first rush of fear and publicity no longer presses as hard. The Risch case may be clearer in some ways now than it was then, though not clearer enough to solve. We can see its main uncertainties. We can also see that they have resisted many years of looking. That resistance is why the case belongs so naturally to the world of patient detective work. It is not a puzzle with a hidden trick waiting for a clever reader. It is a real disappearance in which the available facts may simply be insufficient. Patient work means accepting that possibility while still looking carefully. You can sit with the file and not solve it. That does not make the sitting useless. It keeps the record warm enough for memory. Memory, again, returns us to Joan's name, Joan Risch. Not only the Risch case, not only the quiet kitchen, but Joan herself. The name is short, ordinary, and specific. It belongs to a person who walked through a house on Old Bedford Road, cared for children, read books, kept appointments, and vanished into one of Massachusetts's most persistent unsolved mysteries. Saying the name gently matters. A case can become a title, but a title is never the whole person. Her children, too, grew up with a question that no child should have to carry. The file may record them as witnesses or family members, but their lives continued beyond the reports. They had to live inside the absence, not merely read about it. That reality should keep every theory humble. Speculation may be interesting to outsiders, but for families it touches the foundation of memory. The Risch case is not a game of cleverness. It is an old wound kept open by missing truth. The investigators' families may have felt it too, in a different way. Detectives carry cases home in quiet forms. A late dinner, a distracted silence, a notebook left near the bed, a call that comes during the evening, a spouse asking whether there was any news. The Risch case, with its mother gone from a kitchen and children left behind, would have been hard to set aside. Patient detective work is done by people, and people absorb what they work on. You can imagine a detective driving home along dark roads after one of those early days, headlights sweeping over leaves, the heater blowing faintly, the smell of wool and tobacco in the car. The mind would replay the kitchen, the phone, the wastebasket, the child's words, the possible woman walking. The lack of a body. It is not dramatic to say such thoughts linger. It is ordinary. Unfinished work follows people, especially when a life may depend on it. By the time the case cooled into a longer investigation, the immediate hope of finding Joan alive nearby had likely faded. That change is never one moment only. It happens gradually as searches fail and days lengthen into weeks. Officers may still say missing, families may still hope, but the emotional weather shifts. The air around the file becomes heavier. The questions become less about immediate rescue and more about explanation. In the Risch case, explanation never arrived. No charge was brought, and that absence matters. Police did not gather enough evidence to accuse someone in court. Public suspicion, if it existed in various directions, did not become prosecution. That is important in any responsible retelling. A cold case can invite suspicion toward many people, but suspicion without evidence is not justice. You and I stay with the official restraint. No person was proven responsible for Joan's disappearance. The file stayed open. The open file is both failure and promise. It means the answer was not found. It also means the question was not abandoned entirely. Cold case files remain available for new information, new technology, and new review. The Risch case has lived in that open state for decades, neither solved nor forgotten. You can picture it not as a door flung wide, but as a drawer that can still be opened, its metal handle cool under the hand. Inside that drawer, the earliest pages may matter most. First reports preserve impressions before theories fully hardened. They may contain small details later overlooked, because larger questions dominated. A cold case reviewer would read them slowly, perhaps aloud, noting phrases like appeared, stated, observed, approximately, possible. These words are not decorative. They tell you how certain the writer was. The Risch case depends on such language, because certainty was scarce. The word approximately may be one of the most honest words in any witness file. Approximately 2 o'clock. Approximately 10 minutes later. Approximately the same height. It tells us memory is trying, not pretending to be a clock. In the Risch case, approximate times shape the afternoon. If one time shifts, another interpretation shifts with it. You can feel the delicate structure, like a mobile hanging in still air, each small piece affecting the balance of the others. The children's movements are part of that mobile. When was David returned? Where was Lillian at each moment? When did she enter the house? How quickly did she seek Barbara? These are not cold procedural questions only. They are the way investigators protect the timeline around children who could not protect it themselves. You can imagine adults reconstructing play, lunch, nap, return, discovery, call, all while aware that the children were living through something they could not name. The smallness of the children also deepens the mystery of sound. A household with young children is rarely silent for long. If something sudden happened, did a child cry? Did anyone hear? Did ordinary childhood noise cover something else? Did Joan move quietly to avoid alarming them? These questions cannot be answered firmly, but they remind us that the house was inhabited, not empty. The kitchen was only one room in a living family space. The absence of a clear scream or alarm, if none was reported, has been used by some to argue against a violent intrusion. But absence of reported sound proves less than it seems. Windows may have been closed. Neighbors may have been busy. A sudden event may be quiet. A known person may not provoke alarm. An accident may produce no shout. The Risch case teaches again that what was not heard can matter, but it cannot always decide. The presence of daylight also gives a false sense of security. We tend to imagine disappearances in darkness, but many occur under ordinary light. Daylight can make a neighborhood feel observed when it is not. People are at work, children are at school or playing. Houses are separated by walls and trees. A person can move through afternoon unnoticed because everyone assumes afternoon is safe. The Risch case unfolded in that kind of ordinary light, which makes the silence feel more puzzling, not less. Autumn light in Massachusetts can be thin and slanted by mid-afternoon, especially under cloud. It catches on windows, dulls in wooded areas, and turns roadsides a muted brown and gold. If a woman walked along a road then, drivers might see her briefly and then lose her in the turn of land and trees. You can feel the scene without making it tense. It is simply the physical world the case had to pass through, a world of limited sightlines and lowering day. The movement from house to road is one of the case's central mysteries. Did Joan leave through a door in haste? Was she escorted or forced? Did she step outside for a reason unrelated to the kitchen, and then something happened? Did she go toward the car, intending to drive, then change course? Every version asks us to imagine a threshold. Doorway, step, path, driveway, road. The threshold is where domestic evidence becomes geographic uncertainty. Thresholds are important in missing person cases because they mark the last controlled environment. Inside a house, Investigators can search every room. Outside, the world multiplies. A footprint may be lost. A vehicle may enter. A witness may or may not see. Weather begins its slow work. In the Risch case, the threshold between kitchen and driveway may have been crossed by Joan herself, by someone else, or by both. The file cannot tell us with certainty. If the blood trail to the driveway was interpreted as Joan's movement, then she may have had agency after the kitchen event. But agency is not the same as control. A person can move while injured, confused, frightened, or directed by someone else. This distinction matters because it keeps us from simplifying. Seeing movement does not tell us the state of mind behind it. You can walk a few steps in thought, from linoleum to door to outside air, and still not know why the steps were taken. The car's presence also raises the question of intention. A person going to the car may intend to leave, get help, retrieve something, or steady herself against a familiar object. If Joan reached the car and did not drive away, something interrupted that intention, or the intention was never to drive. The stains near or on the car may tell us contact occurred, but contact is not narrative. It is only touch made visible. Touch made visible is a useful way to think about much of the physical evidence. Blood shows where a body or object contacted a surface. Fingerprints show where skin touched. Disturbance shows where objects moved. But touch does not always explain motive, sequence, or identity. It tells us the world was altered. Interpretation must follow slowly. In the Risch case, visible touch was abundant enough to trouble everyone, and insufficient enough to answer no one. The lack of a recovered weapon or clear injury source, at least in public accounts, adds another layer. If Joan was injured in the kitchen, what caused it? A household accident might involve glass, a knife, a fall, or another object. An assault might involve something removed or never identified. Without Joan found, the injury itself cannot be examined. The cause remains inferred from the room, and the room will not narrow it enough. We are left with effect without known cause. Effect without known cause can produce many stories. That is why patient investigators resist narrative too soon. They ask, what can this stain demonstrate? What can this witness demonstrate? The answer may be smaller than the story wants. In the Risch case, the evidence demonstrates that something unusual happened in or around the kitchen. It does not demonstrate, by itself, the full nature of that something. That smallness is hard, but it is honest. As the years passed, the absence of Joan's remains became both evidence and non-evidence. It matters that no body was found, because many theories must account for it, but absence is not a single fact with a single meaning. It could mean concealment, misadventure in an unsearched place, movement far away, survival under another identity, or loss in a changed landscape. Each meaning is possible in abstract. The case needs more than absence to choose among them. Searches may have been extensive near the time, but no search is absolute. Terrain, water, private property, construction, and human limitations all create gaps. Still, as decades pass without discovery, some possibilities become less likely, though not impossible. A body in a likely hidden nearby area might be expected to surface through chance. A body in fill, water, remote brush, or removed by another person might not. Again, the land gives no simple answer. The construction possibility returns here because it offers one way for nearby absence to persist. Roadwork can transform earth quickly. A trench can be filled. Soil can be moved. A slope can be graded. Workers may not notice something if it is not visible. Or if the timing is wrong. This idea gives a practical shape to a disappearance without confirmed travel far away. But without discovery, records or witness, it remains only a shape drawn around emptiness. Records of construction might, in theory, show where work was active and when. Old maps, contracts, Road plans and crew schedules could help define areas of interest. But such records may be incomplete, and even precise construction data does not reveal whether Joan went there. It only defines possibility. You can imagine a cold case reviewer unfolding an engineering map, its paper large and stiff, lines crossing the landscape where memory has gone soft. The map is useful. It is not a witness. Water features, wooded land, and private properties may also have been considered. A missing person can be hidden by natural features without anyone intending concealment. But searches of such places are difficult, especially as time passes. Vegetation grows. Property changes hands. Water levels shift. Objects decay. The Risch case may have intersected with one of these quiet hiding places, or it may have moved beyond them entirely. The file does not say. The idea that Joan might have survived and begun again somewhere else is emotionally complicated. It leaves open a version in which she lived, but it requires accepting that she never returned to the children, never contacted family in a confirmed way, and remained hidden through decades. Some people have done such things. Most do not, especially under such sudden and disordered circumstances. The theory can never be fully dismissed without proof of death, but it carries a long silence as its burden. That long silence grows louder with each passing decade. A person living under a new name might make mistakes, form relationships, leave records, or eventually confide in someone. No verified trace of Joan has emerged. This does not prove she died on or near the day she vanished, but it pushes the mind gently in that direction. We should state that carefully. Probability is not proof, yet probability is part of how investigators think when evidence is missing. The question of mental state also arises in voluntary or wandering theories. Was Joan distressed, depressed, dissociated, frightened, or otherwise impaired? Public information does not give a clear basis for certainty. Her earlier life contained loss, but many people with loss do not disappear. Her reading may have included dark subjects, but many readers choose such books. Her day appeared ordinary, but private states can be hidden. The honest answer is that we do not know enough. That answer may feel unsatisfying, but it protects her dignity. Protecting dignity is not separate from investigation. It keeps speculation from becoming harm. Joan cannot explain her books, her thoughts, her errands, or her final movements. We therefore owe her restraint. We can examine possibilities without turning them into character judgments. The Risch case went cold in part because evidence failed to identify a path, not because Joan's life can be easily decoded from a few surviving details. The family's move to Lincoln earlier that year may also matter as context. A newer household means routines still settling, neighbors still becoming familiar, local patterns not yet deeply established. Joan may have known some nearby people well enough for practical help, while still being relatively new to the area. That newness could affect who noticed strangers, who understood her habits, and how quickly small deviations seemed significant. It does not solve anything, but it belongs in the background. A newly settled home also contains the texture of transition. Boxes recently unpacked, rooms arranged, local roads learned, children adjusted to new spaces. You can imagine the house carrying that mixture of permanence and freshness, with familiar family items placed in a town still becoming familiar. The Risch kitchen was part of a life in progress, not a long-established stage. That sense of transition may have made later reconstruction slightly harder for everyone. Neighbors may not have known every usual pattern yet. Was Joan often outside at that time? Did she usually leave the children with Barbara? Did she commonly carry certain items? Did she take walks? Did she answer the door freely? Such questions are easier in a neighborhood where habits have been observed for years. In a newer setting, people may know enough to help, but not enough to define what was truly unusual. The Risch case unfolded within that partial familiarity. Partial familiarity can shape witness confidence. A close friend might identify Joan from posture at a distance. A newer neighbor might be less certain. A child might know the mother's movements but not the clock. A delivery person might know the house but not the family. The investigation had to weave these levels of knowledge together. Some threads were strong, others were fine and fraying. The pattern that emerged was incomplete. The old case also asks us to think about gender and expectation in that era. A mother at home during the day might be assumed safe, available, and anchored by domestic responsibility. Her disappearance could therefore feel almost impossible to those around her. But social expectation can obscure practical risk. A woman alone in a house may encounter strangers, accidents, emotional strain, or medical events. The ordinary role does not protect the person inside it. The Risch case made that painfully visible. At the same time, investigators in that era may have interpreted some details through assumptions about motherhood, marriage, and domestic life. Modern reviewers might ask whether those assumptions helped or hindered. Did they make voluntary disappearance seem impossible? Did they make hidden distress easier to miss? Did they make an intruder seem more likely or less likely? These are fair questions, but they cannot be answered with certainty from a distance. We can only keep them in mind as part of the case's historical setting. Historical setting matters because investigation is always shaped by its time. The language of reports, the tools of forensics, the role of local police, the speed of communication, the privacy of households, and the expectations placed on women all belonged to 1961. We cannot lift the case out of that year and place it fully in our own. We can bring modern thought to it, but the evidence was born in another world. That world had wall phones, paper records, and many unrecorded movements. The wall phone may be the object that most clearly marks the distance. Today, help can be called from a pocket. In Joan's kitchen, help belonged to a fixed point on the wall. If that point was disabled, the house's voice was cut. You can imagine the receiver heavy in the wastebasket, silent, no dial tone reaching anyone. Whether it fell, was placed, or was torn away, its silence became symbolic. But symbols are not answers, and the phone remains both powerful and mute. The wastebasket's oddness has endured for the same reason. It feels like an action, not merely an accident. Someone had to move it, unless it was knocked there. Someone had to place the receiver inside, unless it fell in by some unlikely motion. But the case does not tell us who or why. You can see how investigators might stand over it, aware that the answer could be in the simplest motion of a hand. The hand is missing from the record. Hands are everywhere in this case, though unnamed. A hand turning a library page, a hand holding a child's dental appointment card, a hand reaching for the phone, a hand moving a wastebasket, a hand on a car door, a hand writing the first police notes, a hand lifting the file years later. The Risch case is made of human contact, preserved only in fragments. We follow those fragments as gently as we can. The car door, if marked, asks whether Joan touched it while bleeding, or whether something bloody touched it otherwise. A handle is a natural place to reach. A trunk, fender, or seat can hold a different implication. Public summaries vary in their precision, and without the original photographs in front of us, we should be cautious. What matters is that the car was not simply irrelevant. It stood at the edge of the scene, connected enough to matter and silent enough to frustrate. If the car had been used by someone else, one might expect signs of movement, missing keys, changed position, or witnesses. If it was not used, then the marks may reflect an attempted use or contact in passing. Investigators would consider whether Joan meant to drive to help or escape, but a serious injury, confusion, or interruption might prevent that. You and I do not need to choose. We notice the car as another unfinished sentence. The driveway itself is a narrow stage between private and public space. It belongs to the house, yet it opens toward the road. A person in the driveway may be seen by neighbors or passing drivers, but only if someone looks at the right moment. In the Risch case, The driveway may have held one of the last transitions Joan made. The air there would have smelled of leaves, damp gravel, and the faint coolness of late afternoon. It is a small place to hold so much uncertainty. At some point, the searchers had to move beyond what could be directly tied to Joan and into broader possibility. They would ask about strangers in the area, recent incidents, unusual calls, salesmen, workers, vehicles, and anyone who might have had reason to approach the house. This kind of canvass is slow and often unrewarding. Most people know nothing. A few offer something vague. A very few offer something useful. In the Risch case, none offered the missing key. The lack of a suspect meant the investigation could not narrow around a person's contradictions. When detectives have a suspect, they can test alibis, compare statements, search property, examine relationships, and apply pressure. Without one, the case remains more diffuse. The Risch file had scenes and theories, but no confirmed actor beyond Joan. That absence limited the kinds of questions detectives could ask. You cannot confront a shadow, and you cannot search a name you do not have. If a stranger was involved, he may have left the area quickly and never come to police attention for this event. If an acquaintance was involved, he or she may have appeared ordinary under questioning, or may not have been identified as relevant. If no one was involved, then suspect development would naturally fail. Each possibility explains the lack of a suspect differently. The result, however, is the same in the file. No arrest, no charge, no courtroom answer. Courtroom answers require a standard that old speculation cannot meet. That is worth remembering when discussing any unsolved case. It is one thing for readers to favor a theory, it is another for investigators to prove it. The Risch case may invite belief, but belief is not evidence. A fair telling honors that difference because fairness is part of the calm we are trying to keep. The calm does not remove sorrow, it simply gives sorrow room to sit without being sharpened. Joan's disappearance was a family tragedy before it became a public mystery. The kitchen was a family room before it became a case detail. The books were reading material before they became clues. The road was a route home before it became a possible last path. Each ordinary thing changed because Joan was no longer there to explain it. That inability to explain is perhaps the deepest absence. If Joan had been found injured, she might have told the sequence. If she had left willingly and returned, she might have explained the reason. If another person was identified, evidence might have been tested against his account. Instead, the file contains only the traces left behind. You and I sit with those traces, aware that the one voice most needed is missing from every page. The missing voice also affects how we read the library books. Joan cannot say whether she chose them casually or deliberately. She cannot say whether she was researching, relaxing, worrying, or simply reading. She cannot say whether any passage stayed with her. Therefore, the books remain mute objects, even though they seem to invite interpretation. The same is true of the phone. It cannot say whether she reached for it. The car cannot say whether she meant to leave. The house cannot say why it changed. Detective work, in the absence of voice, becomes a kind of listening to mute things. It listens to placement, timing, material, memory, and absence. It asks objects to speak within their limits. A stain can say contact happened here. A receipt can say purchase happened then. A witness can say, I saw someone who may have been her. The investigator must not make those voices louder than they are. The Risch case teaches that discipline gently but firmly. As evening deepened on the first day, the practical needs would have continued. Children fed and comforted. Family notified. Reports filed. Searches organized. Evidence preserved. Journalists managed. Phones answered. A missing person's day does not pause for emotional shock. People must keep doing tasks while absorbing the impossible. You can feel the tiredness of that evening, the cold air outside, the artificial light inside, the sense that everything had begun but nothing had resolved. The next morning would not have felt like a fresh start. It would have felt like continuation under colder facts. Joan had not come home overnight. No hospital had called with relief. No simple explanation had arrived. Daylight returned to the same roads and trees, making them searchable again, but not necessarily more generous. Searchers may have gone back over areas, expanding, checking, asking. The kitchen remained behind them, holding the first riddle. Mourning after a disappearance has a particular cruelty, because it proves the night did not fix anything. Families may listen for a car in the driveway, a step at the door, a phone call. Investigators may hope a person who left in distress will return or be found by dawn. When that does not happen, the case changes. It becomes less immediate in one sense, and more grave in another. The Risch case crossed that threshold quietly, with no answer waiting in the morning light. Days after that, the work became broader and more administrative. Leads assigned, search areas logged, interviews followed up, newspaper notices repeated, the blood evidence processed as far as possible, family and friends questioned for any sign of plan or trouble. It is not dramatic work, but it is the work. You can hear the typewriter keys in an adjoining office, the bell at the end of a line, the rip of paper from the carriage, and the file growing page by page. The sound of a typewriter belongs to this case's era almost as much as the wall phone. Reports were physical objects from the start. Mistakes were corrected with overstrike, erasure, or fresh pages. Copies were made with carbon paper. A name typed once became part of the permanent record. There is a calm gravity in that, the mechanical rhythm of official memory being created. In the Risch case, that memory preserved enough for us to sit here decades later, still turning the pages. Turning pages is the right motion for this kind of mystery. It is slower than scrolling, more deliberate than searching. You feel the page before you read it. You notice the weight of what came before. Old cases reward that pace because they often cannot be understood through one bright detail. The Risch case needs the kitchen, the timeline, the witnesses, the books, the geography, and the family context all held together. None of them should be allowed to drown out the others. The family context includes ordinary relationships with neighbors, and those relationships mattered in the immediate response. Barbara Barker helped because she was near and connected. Other neighbors may have looked, spoken, or offered care. A community can become part of a search almost before it realizes what it is doing. People step outside, compare times, watch children, bring coffee, repeat descriptions. The Risch case began in a home, but it quickly became a neighborhood's unanswered question. Neighborhoods remember in uneven ways. Some people remember the police cars. Some remember being told to watch for Joan. Some remember keeping children inside. Some remember nothing until years later, when the case is mentioned and a feeling returns. That unevenness is natural. A community is not one mind. It is many minds, each holding a different piece of the afternoon. Investigators gathered as many as they could, but the whole picture still did not form. The idea of a quiet kitchen going cold may sound paradoxical, because the kitchen was not cold at first. It was active evidence, fresh and urgent. But it went cold because the activity did not connect to a continuing trail. The stains did not identify a perpetrator. The phone did not preserve a call. The car did not leave. The sightings did not become certain. The room's urgency became archival. That is a profound transformation, and it happened slowly. A room becomes archival when it can no longer be revisited as it was. The floor is cleaned. Objects are moved. The family's life changes or leaves. Photographs and reports become substitutes for direct observation. Investigators may return to the address, but the original moment is gone. In the Risch case, the kitchen lives now mostly through description, memory, and records. We are not standing in it. We are standing in what the file preserved of it. That limitation should make us gentle with certainty. If even the first investigators who saw the room with their own eyes could not solve it, then later readers should be modest. We can think carefully, we can notice patterns, we can ask better questions, but we should not mistake distance for superiority. The Risch case has humbled many people because it looks close to solvable and remains just beyond reach. Some mysteries endure because they are vast. This one endures because it is intimate. A single house, a single afternoon, a mother and 2 children, a neighbor, a phone, a road. The intimacy makes the unknown feel more personal. You can imagine yourself at the kitchen table, with the file open and the lamp casting a small circle of light, and the whole case fits inside that circle, except for the part that matters most. That part remains outside the light. The outside darkness is not something we need to dramatize. It is simply the area beyond confirmed fact. We can let it be dark without filling it with imagined scenes. Perhaps Joan walked into it. Perhaps someone drove her into it. Perhaps it began and ended nearer than anyone knew. The darkness holds all possibilities because none has been proven. We keep the lamp on the facts and allow the rest to stay quiet. As the years moved on, legal declarations may have addressed Joan's status for practical purposes, as often happens when a missing person is gone for a long time. But practical status is not the same as investigative answer. Families must settle estates, records, and responsibilities even without knowing. The law sometimes creates an administrative ending where the heart and the file still have none. The Risch case remained unsolved regardless of any necessary paperwork. Paperwork can be merciful in one way and painful in another. It allows life to continue, but it may feel like accepting what has not been proven. You can imagine forms signed under fluorescent lights, names typed, dates entered, the absence translated into official categories. Cold cases often require this translation. A person becomes missing, presumed, unresolved, open. The language is necessary, but never large enough for the human reality. The human reality is that Joan did not return to explain the kitchen. That single fact outlived every theory. It outlived the first searches, the newspaper cycle, the aging of witnesses, the shift from typewriters to computers, and the transformation of forensic science. It remains the center. No matter how many details we examine, we come back to that. Joan Risch disappeared from an ordinary day, and the ordinary day could not be put back together. We can continue to follow how investigators and later readers tried to put it together, especially through the theories that formed around the library books and the road sightings. Those 2 areas often pull in different directions. The books point inward, toward private thought, planning, or coincidence. The sightings point outward, toward movement, injury, or chance encounters. The Risch case sits between inward and outward explanations, and neither side has won. The inward explanation asks whether the world interrupted her without warning. A third explanation, injury and wandering, lies partly between them, beginning inside the house and ending outside it without another person necessarily involved. You can picture these 3 paths leaving the kitchen like faint tracks in dust. Each begins at the same room. Each fades before reaching a destination. To examine the books more carefully, we should imagine not only their topics but their timing. When were they borrowed? Were they read shortly before the disappearance, or earlier? Were they returned? Were they part of a pattern of reading, or a sudden cluster? Such details matter. A single book on disappearance has one meaning. Several books close together may invite more attention. But even then, a reader's curiosity is not a plan. The file must show more before the inference becomes strong. The stories within those books may have involved hidden bodies, staged scenes, or missing women, depending on the titles reported. It is easy for later readers to search for parallels, but stories often contain broad human fears and situations, and parallels can be found after many events. If someone disappears after reading a book about disappearance, the connection feels meaningful. If she does not disappear, no one notices the book. This is hindsight's quiet trick. It selects the coincidence because the event taught us where to look. Detectives know hindsight can help or harm. It helps by identifying details that were invisible before significance attached to them. It harms by making unrelated details glow. The library books may be either kind. We cannot fully know. You and I place them in the file with a note that says interesting, not decisive. That is perhaps the fairest label many Risch details can carry. The road sightings need the same label: interesting, not decisive. A woman walking after the time of the kitchen event would be important if she was Joan, but the identification remains uncertain. The description, distance, time, and witness confidence all matter. Later repetition can make a sighting sound firmer than it was. We should hold it at its original strength as best we can. The Risch case deserves facts at their true weight, neither inflated nor dismissed. If the sighting near a larger road was Joan, then she traveled farther than one might expect from the kitchen alone. How did she get there? On foot, in a vehicle, then out. Along a route witnesses did not observe. Each answer changes the case. If she was walking, why did no one stop or call immediately? Perhaps she did not appear distressed enough. Perhaps drivers were unsure. Perhaps the sighting was reported only after the news spread. These are human explanations, not failures of character. People often do not intervene when they see something ambiguous. A woman walking along a road may look tired, upset, or simply determined. A passing driver has seconds to decide whether anything is wrong. In 1961, calling police was not as immediate as tapping a screen. One had to reach a phone. The moment might pass. If the woman was Joan, the world may have missed her not from cruelty, but from uncertainty. That is a painful and ordinary possibility. If the sighting was not Joan, then investigators may have spent precious thought on a stranger whose life briefly crossed the edge of the mystery. That too is common. Unsolved cases attract coincidental echoes. A similar woman walks somewhere. A similar car passes. A similar story appears. The investigation must test the echo without letting it become the voice. In the Risch case, some echoes may have remained unresolved because they could not be either confirmed or eliminated. A confirmed elimination can be comforting in a strange way. It removes a path. An unresolved lead remains open, and too many open leads make a file restless. Possible sighting, possible car, possible planning, possible accident. The word possible accumulates until the case feels crowded with doors. You and I move through them slowly, not opening all at once. The quiet script of the file asks for one handle at a time. The car sighting, where it appears in accounts, is another such door. An unfamiliar vehicle near the house might be vital, or it might be nothing. Neighborhoods see unfamiliar cars all the time. Delivery vehicles, visitors, workers, wrong turns, sales calls. A vehicle becomes suspicious only when placed precisely with unusual behavior and a connection to the event. Without that, it remains a shape in the corner of memory. The Risch case has several shapes like that. The fact that no neighbor reported a clear confrontation or abduction may push some readers away from stranger theories. But quiet coercion, known person contact, or rapid movement could reduce obvious signs. Conversely, the lack of evidence for another person may push others toward accident or voluntary disappearance. Both reactions are understandable. The patient approach keeps asking what each reaction depends upon. Are we responding to evidence or to what feels more imaginable? Imagination is useful in detective work when it generates questions. It is dangerous when it generates answers. You can imagine several sequences in the Risch kitchen, but the file does not certify any of them. A detective might use imagination to ask, would this leave a mark there? Would that explain the phone? Would this match the sighting? Then the evidence must answer. If the evidence stays quiet, imagination must step back. Stepping back is a calm discipline. It lets the listener breathe. It lets the case remain what it is. We do not have to solve Joan's disappearance in order to accompany the patient work done around it. We can notice the investigator's restraint, the family's endurance, the witness's efforts, the physical limits of the era, and the way one room held too many possible meanings. That is enough for this portion of the night. But the file still has more to offer, not in the sense of a hidden solution waiting on the next page, but in the way an old case teaches us how uncertainty is carried across years, through police departments, newspapers, family memory, and the quiet persistence of people who keep looking when the first answers never come. That persistence is the softest thing left in the Risch case, because long after the first searchers went home and the first reports dried in their folders, the question did not vanish with Joan. It stayed in the kitchen, in the driveway, in the autumn road, and in the careful minds of people who understood that some mysteries are not kept alive by curiosity alone. They are kept alive by care. You can rest with the plain truth now. Joan Risch was never found, no one was ever charged in her disappearance, and the case remains unsolved all these years later. The quiet kitchen on Old Bedford Road did not give enough of itself to the detectives who stood there, and the sightings, the books, the blood evidence, and the long searches never joined into one answer that could be carried into daylight and set down with certainty. There is no need to force the silence to speak more than it can. The file has held its shape for decades, and perhaps somewhere there is still a name, a memory, a record, or a small overlooked fact that could change the light inside it. Or perhaps the answer moved beyond reach on that October afternoon, leaving only the patient work behind, and the human wish that someone, someday, might understand what happened to Joan. For tonight, you can leave the kitchen as it is, not solved, not forgotten, but quiet. The lamp can stay low over the old paper, the road can settle back beneath the leaves, and the unanswered question can rest where it has rested for so long, softly, without asking anything more of you now.